Chapter 299. It turned out that before Venerable Fiery Dragon went out to sea, he had the intention of letting someone else inherit his orthodoxy. Hence, he left all his cultivation techniques and magic treasures in his cave abode for the fated person to inherit. Although the jade bamboo slip recorded the mountain range where the cave abode was located, it did not record its exact location. Not to mention the thousands of years of vicissitudes, the mountain range might not even exist. Even if the cave abode was still there, its name would have changed many times. How could Zhang Xiaohua search for it in such a huge mainland with countless of mountain ranges? This left Zhang Xiaohua with a heart full of regrets. She could only blame Venerable Fiery Dragon for being unscrupulous. When Venerable Fiery Dragon went out to sea, although he was already in the foundation establishment stage, he could already ride on his sword or use other spells to fly. But at that time, all the spells had been destroyed. How could Venerable Fiery Dragon bear to waste his own vital energy? He could only rely on the boat used by ordinary people. It was unknown whether Venerable Fiery Dragon was lucky or unlucky. Not long after he went out to sea, he met with a huge storm. His boat shook and completely disintegrated, leaving behind only a pile of wood. Venerable Fiery Dragon was glad that he did not bring the other boatmen along. At the same time, he cursed the shopkeeper who sold the boat. He was like Zhang Xiaohua, drifting on the sea for a few days before luckily finding this deserted island. Since then, he had spent the rest of his life on this deserted island. However, in the jade bamboo slip, Venerable Fiery Dragon mentioned that it was not that he could not return to the mainland. It was just that he had found fire elemental vital energy on this deserted island. It was able to prolong his life and thus, he had been staying on this deserted island. This sentence made Zhang Xiaohua extremely excited. If I can cultivate to old fire's level, even if I don't use a boat, I can still return to the mainland. That would be great. Otherwise, I would really lose the motivation to move forward. There was still a lot of content recorded in the jade bamboo slip. There was some common knowledge of the immortal Tao, basic spells and so on. However, Zhang Xiaohua only skimmed through it and did not pay much attention to it. What he was concerned about was the content of the other 5 jade bamboo slips. Sure enough, he found information about other jade slips in a corner of the jade slip. These 5 jade slips actually recorded the spells that Venerable Fire Dragon comprehended on this deserted island. Doesn't that mean that only those in the foundation establishment stage can use them? Oh, it didn't say. Perhaps those in the chi refining stage can also use them. What I lack now are spells that can be used by those in the chi refining stage. There seems to be some records in these jade slips. Should I cultivate these basic spells first and cultivate the other jade slips after I have the foundation? Zhang Xiaohua was a little hesitant, but after thinking about it, she came to a decision. Let's take a look at what spells are in the other jade slips first. That way, I can make some arrangements. Wouldn't it be too boring if I kept cultivating a single spell? Without a doubt, Venerable Fiery Dragon had set up a restriction in the other 5 jade bamboo slips. If one wanted to read the incantations in the jade bamboo slips, he would have to cultivate the restriction first. Zhang Xiaohua searched through the records in the jade bamboo slips. Sure enough, she found the incantation of the basic restriction in one corner. Zhang Xiaohua was overjoyed. To be honest, she was very curious about the restriction. First, it was the snow that looked like real snow. Then, it was the forbidden area in the misty school that could devour people. Then, it was the restriction in Xinji town that looked like white fog. Now, there was a light screen at the entrance of the cave that could withstand her strength of 10,000 pounds. All of these made her very excited. She could not wait to set up such a magical thing immediately. However, although the incantation recorded in the jade bamboo slips was the basic restriction, it was much more complicated than the incantation of the earth escape technique. It was similar to the complicated incantation recorded in the back of the alchemy technique. However, Zhang Xiaohua could not practice the alchemy technique. She could only look at the simple theory. This restriction could be cultivated at any time. At that moment, Zhang Xiaohua did not delay any further. First, she went outside to look at the sky. After estimating the time, she began to comprehend the restriction incantation in the cave. For dozens of days, she comprehended the restriction incantation during the day and cultivated the Carefree Heart Sutra at night. After experiencing countless failures, Zhang Xiaohua finally comprehended the most basic restriction incantation. She successfully placed it on a jade bamboo slip that was about to lose its vitality. In her divine sense, the jade bamboo slip was immediately protected. Without the corresponding incantation, she could not enter it at all. However, when she excitedly tried to use the restriction incantation that she had just learned on the other 5 jade bamboo slips, she was very upset to find that only one of the small jade bamboo slips was unlocked. The rest of the jade slips did not move at all. When she used her divine sense to enter the jade slips, what appeared in her mind was restriction and formation. Zhang Xiaohua almost vomited blood and fell to the ground. "Elder Hua, you can't play like this. This is a chain of traps. Only by learning this jade slip can she comprehend the other jade slips. You're really good." At this time, she heard "kacha kacha" sounds of thunder outside. Zhang Xiaohua was overjoyed and said, "Soon, soon. It's time to go out and stretch my muscles." After she finished speaking, she put all the jade slips into her money pouch and walked out with her head held high. The next day, Zhang Xiaohua tempered his muscles and bones outside before returning to the cave in high spirits. He already had a plan in mind. Since Elder Hua made this arrangement, he naturally had his reasons. She was only a junior cultivator in the Tao of Immortality. There were many things that she had to cross the river by feeling the stones. Now that there was such an arrangement, she could only listen to it. Either way, it was cultivation. What to cultivate first and what to cultivate later was the same. Zhang Xiaohua first immersed his divine sense into the jade slip that had not been touched by anyone for 10,000 years and roughly looked through it. So it turns out that restrictions and formations are the same type of cultivation. If it's used in a small area, it's called a restriction. If it's used in a large area, it's called a formation. If it's used in a large area, it's called a restriction. Hee, I understand now. Isn't this just a person having 2 names? When they're young, they can be called nicknames, such as Dumbo or Gosheng. When they grow up, they can be called Hanli or Zhang Xiaofan. That's right, why didn't mother give me a nickname? Nickname? Meng is his nickname, but I don't know what name Jing Xian Shirtai gave him. Her thoughts began to break down. After a while, she was done with her daydreaming. Only then did she seriously look through the jade slip. This venerable fiery dragon was actually a master of formations. He had a unique way of cultivating formations. Furthermore, after he arrived at the deserted island, in order to withstand the changes in heaven and earth, he was even more obsessed with formations. He had a very thorough understanding of formations. This seemingly small jade slip recorded the essence of his 100 years of cultivation in formations. Zhang Xiaohua looked at it for a long time and knew that it was not something that could be comprehended in a short period of time. Although he despised the fire dragon immortal for not leaving everything to him, he had left a deep impression on the jade bamboo slip in his hand. When she saw the last part of the jade slip, Zhang Xiaohua's eyes lit up. There were a few big words written on it: Jade Blood Pill Refinement. What kind of cultivation technique was this? After taking a closer look, he realized, it turns out that the cultivation of this formation has a lot to do with one's divine sense. The stronger one's divine sense is, the faster one can set up the formation. Moreover, the foundation of the formation is the calculation of changes. The stronger one's divine sense is, the faster one can calculate and the easier it is to comprehend. The relationship between the divine sense and the cultivation of the formation was something that Fire Dragon Immortal had vaguely known long ago. He only understood it when he set up the formation and fought for a slim chance of survival against the heavens and earth. Unfortunately, his genuine chi was limited and he could not comprehend more profound formations. Oh, in order to strengthen his divine sense, he actually thought of a method of exchanging genuine chi for divine sense. Is it called refining elixir heart with jade blood? However, he actually did not master this cultivation technique. He only tried it in the beginning. When he felt that it was effective, he continued to calculate the later parts. As for whether the later parts of the cultivation technique were effective, even he himself did not know. Zhang Xiaohua touched her chin and muttered to herself. She knew the benefits of the divine sense. Not to mention being able to distinguish between magic treasures and jade slips, even being able to see in the dark and see things in other rooms was enough to move her. Furthermore, the area that her divine sense could cover was limited. If she could increase her divine sense and expand the area that it could cover, she knew that there would be endless benefits. But, after all, this is just a theory. What if it doesn't work? But on the other hand, Elder Hua is a big shot in the foundation establishment stage. Although his things are just theories, they are most likely correct. If not, why would he dare to record them down? Isn't he afraid that others will dig up his remains? Curse him behind his back? Following which, Zhang Xiaohua looked at the densely packed formations and restrictive spells in front of her. She felt a headache coming on. If she did not have the help of her divine sense, when would she be able to comprehend all of them? Actually, Zhang Xiaohua was also belittling herself. Her divine sense had appeared early. Moreover, for some reasons that she did not know, the growth of her divine sense was extremely fast. Otherwise, she would not have been able to grasp the basics of restrictive spells in just a few dozen days. Elder Hua's cultivation technique was an unimaginable method. It was to use all of the true qi in her body in exchange for a slight increase in her divine sense. This method was not allowed in Elder Hua's era, nor was there any true qi for him to use to increase his divine sense. Even during the heyday of the immortal Tao, there might not be anyone who was willing to cultivate it. All of the true qi had to be used up and replenished. The consumption of origin stones or pills was not a small number. Especially when one's cultivation was higher, the more they would need. However, these were only used in exchange for a slight increase in their divine sense. How could anyone be willing to cultivate this kind of cultivation technique that was not proportional to the output? However, on this deserted island, there just happened to be such a person who met the requirements. First of all, Zhang Xiaohua's cultivation was very low, only at the 5th layer of qi refining. She did not have much true qi in her body. Secondly, Zhang Xiaohua had the crouching ox rock, which contained a huge amount of spiritual qi of heaven and earth. A small origin stone from there was enough for her to cultivate for a very long time. She did not have to worry about not having enough true qi. It could be said that this jade blood pill refining technique was simply tailor-made for her. Chapter 300. In fact, there was another benefit in it. When he first came to the deserted island, Zhang Xiaohua understood the principle of destruction before creation. This blue blood pill refining technique exhausted all the true qi in his body every time. From another point of view, it was to train his true qi usage. Every time he exhausted all the true qi in his body, he would be able to enhance the regeneration of true qi, thus increasing his own cultivation. After considering the gains and losses of this cultivation method, Zhang Xiaohua decided that he had to successfully cultivate the jade blood pill refining heart. This was because he knew that now that all methods had been destroyed, there was no other shortcut for him to take. Only by cultivating his spiritual sense to an incomparably powerful level would he be able to master these formations and restrictions. Zhang Xiaohua once again immersed his divine sense into the jade slip, silently memorizing the thousands of words at the back of the jade slip. Only then did he withdraw his divine sense, put away the jade slip, and closed his eyes to comprehend. After a long time, his hands began to change, constantly forming different signs. With the changes of these strange signs, a layer of sweat gradually appeared on Zhang Xiaohua's head, and his brows were tightly knitted. Until finally, his face turned pale, and he clenched his teeth tightly. Only then did his expression relax, and the signs in his hands gradually stopped. Then he opened his eyes, sighed slightly, and took out a piece of vitality stone from his arms to replenish his true qi. After a while, his face returned to normal, and only then did he put the vitality stone back into his arms. This blue blood pill refining technique is really overbearing. It ignites the true qi and turns it into true fire. Using this true fire to refine one's divine sense, this feeling is really painful. The whole meridians are burning, and the mind is also burning like a flame, more painful than being pricked by needles. However, this effect is not for show. My divine sense is really strengthened a little, and it is worthy of its name. Moreover, after I replenish my true qi, it seems that my true qi can also be strengthened a little, really killing two birds with one stone. Unfortunately, practicing this technique is a headache. If I practice this technique all the time, I will either go crazy or go crazy from the pain. It's better to have a limit. Practicing 3 times in the morning, afternoon, and evening will be enough. Any more and the pain will be unbearable. What fun is there in practicing? Therefore, in the following days, Zhang Xiaohua only practiced the blue blood pill refining technique 3 times a day, and used the rest of the time to comprehend restrictions and formations. Of course, there was no delay in practicing the Carefree Heart Sutra at night. Even the Big Dipper magical fist, as usual, was a fist technique that he practiced every morning when he opened his eyes. When practicing, there was no sense of time. Although Zhang Xiaohua's cultivation was still shallow, 2 years had passed in the blink of an eye. In these 2 years, there were no ships that came by. However, Zhang Xiaohua achieved great results in his practice. He had broken through the 6th level of the Carefree Heart Sutra and was in the process of stabilizing it. He had also reached the 7th level of the Big Dipper magical fist, and the bones in his body were gradually turning transparent. He had also reached a bottleneck in comprehending restrictions and formations. He had already learned the basic restrictions and formations, and could easily set up some restrictions. As for formations, some simple and small formations, such as the 3 talents flag formation, were not worth mentioning in his eyes now. It was just that he did not have a suitable formation flag, so he could not set it up casually. Speaking of formation flags, simple and special formations could only be set up by some magical instruments. These instruments had to be refined to be effective, which was the way of refining. This was not explained in the small jade slip, and even in the chubby jade slip, it was not detailed. Presumably, Venerable Fire Dragon was not proficient in refining weapons, so there was no detailed record. Speaking of Zhang Xiaohua's cultivation results, the most outstanding was the cultivation of his spiritual sense. Although he only practiced 3 times a day, and each time he only increased his spiritual sense by a little, the accumulation over time was very impressive. Now, the range of his spiritual sense could almost cover the entire deserted island. He had just reached the peak of the early stage of qi refining, and had not entered the middle stage of qi refining. According to the records in the Carefree Heart Sutra, he had just cultivated his spiritual sense. One day, when it was close to noon, Zhang Xiaohua stopped comprehending the restriction and sat down cross-legged. His hands began to constantly change the incantation. Suddenly, the genuine qi in his meridians seemed to be ignited by something, and all of it turned into invisible genuine fire, rushing straight to his mind. In the Naiwan Palace in his upper dantian, the invisible void was ignited by the endless genuine fire, and the entire void was about to be scorched. Every time the void dried up, a little bit of vitality would fly in from a mysterious place in the depths of his mind. Once these little bits of vitality entered his upper dantian, they moistened his Naiwan Palace like raindrops, filling it with vitality. Today seemed to be different from the past. The endless genuine fire not only scorched his Naiwan Palace, but also melted the void in his upper dantian. Everything in the void seemed to be distorted. A wisp of genuine fire flashed past, and Zhang Xiaohua felt a pain in his mind. Zhang Xiaohua also seemed to feel that today was different. The incantation in his hands changed faster, and the genuine fire became more intense. At a certain moment, the entire void in his upper dantian suddenly collapsed, and a few bits of vitality flew in. At the place where the void collapsed, a ball of liquid appeared and absorbed the vitality flying in. In an instant, a 7-colored light flashed and the entire void returned to its original state. All of the genuine fire disappeared, and only the ball of liquid was left, slowly rotating and agitating, just like the heart of an elixir. Zhang Xiaohua, who was in the cave, felt a pain in his head as if it was being split open by an axe when the ball of liquid appeared. If it was not for the torment of the past 2 years, he might have fainted at this moment. With this splitting pain, his mind also lit up. He felt that the whole world had changed completely, and the perception of his divine sense had expanded by 2 times. Following that, he felt an incomparable comfort, and the pain in his mind disappeared without a trace. A kind of incomparable joy in his upper dantian instantly spread throughout his entire body. He had to give Zhang Xiaohua a compliment for her good luck. Initially, there was no elixir heart in the upper dantian. One could only use the primordial fire ignited by the vital energy to refine the void. This process of refining was the most dangerous. Although it could strengthen one's divine sense, it was also extremely easy to refine one's Niwen Palace. Zhang Xiaohua was only a qi cultivator in the initial stage of qi refinement realm and not in the foundation establishment stage. He was far less confident in the primordial fire than Venerable Huolong. If it was not for the little bit of vitality in the primordial fire, his Niwen Palace would have been refined and he would have become an idiot. The most dangerous and impossible thing would be the appearance of the essence of cinnabar. That was something that came out of nothing and had long exceeded the capabilities of Venerable Fire Dragon. It was not something that he could have predicted. The cultivation method that he had created was only a theoretical cultivation method and was incomplete. It could also be said that it was a cultivation method that did not exist in the air. It was the cultivation method that Venerable Fire Dragon had imagined. Furthermore, it was clearly stated in the jade slip that he had not practiced it. He had only tried the beginning and felt that he could cultivate it successfully. However, it was precisely this feeling that misled Zhang Xiaohua. A perfected cultivator in the foundation building realm was a figure that far exceeded Zhang Xiaohua's understanding. In his understanding, the perfected cultivator was only in the 18th layer of the qi refining realm. Since the foundation building realm was superior to the qi refining realm, Zhang Xiaohua was only qualified to prostrate himself in worship. How could he possibly doubt him? Even with this feeling, Zhang Xiaohua only thought that this venerable fire dragon was an expert who did not practice it because he did not have enough qi of heaven and earth. Who would have thought that it was just a pie in the sky? However, he treated the path of despair as a smooth road, and walked step by step towards the cliff of the pie in the sky. At this critical moment, when he was guiding the lightning, the energy separated from the starlight became his life-saving straw. It nourished his Niwen Palace bit by bit, and at the same time, it condensed the source of the spiritual sense in his upper dantian. It also provided energy for the formation of the elixir refining skill. It allowed Zhang Xiaohua to cultivate the elixir refining skill in the most hopeless and impossible situation, and took the crucial step in the cultivation of the upper dantian. This was the cause and effect of everything. Who could explain it clearly? How would Zhang Xiaohua know of the many twists and turns and the cause and effect of this? He only felt that this foundation establishment stage cultivator's supernatural powers were incomparably strong. This venerable fiery dragon was really a genius and he was really lucky. After he used the primordial stones to replenish his vital qi, he then thought, my spiritual sense is now twice as strong as before. Furthermore, I feel refreshed and my mind is clearer than ever. There are many realizations in my heart. Could this be the sign of the initial success of the elixir refining skill? It's just that this skill has no continuation. Should I continue to practice like this in the future? Forget it, let's not think so much. This skill is similar to the Big Dipper magical fist. There's no need to practice it intentionally, and it's just a routine. I'll continue to practice like this in the future. In the afternoon, when Zhang Xiaohua was comprehending the restrictions and arrays, he was delighted to find that he could understand many of the areas that he did not understand in the past. Furthermore, the bottlenecks that he faced previously did not exist, and he seemed to be able to make further progress in the cultivation of arrays. After a few more days, Zhang Xiaohua was able to master the arrays with ease, and this gave him the time to consider the other few jade bamboo slips. At the same time, he was confident that he could unlock the restrictions on one of the jade bamboo slips. This time, he picked up the jade bamboo slip that looked thin and slender. First, he used his spiritual sense to circle around the jade bamboo slip, and then used his spiritual sense to enter different parts of the jade bamboo slip to test it out. Not long after, his lips curled into a smile. Following which, he confidently used his hands to form a few complicated seals and entered the jade bamboo slip. The jade bamboo slip first emitted a crimson glow, then turned white and disappeared. At this moment, when Zhang Xiaohua's spiritual sense entered, there was no longer any obstruction. However, when the words in the jade bamboo slip entered his mind, Zhang Xiaohua's face flashed with an unfathomable expression. Please accept, please tip, thank you. Chapter 301. The two words that appeared in her mind were, fire escape. Fire escape, as the name suggests, is an escape technique used in the fire. This earth escape technique is used to escape. Oh, no, it's used to travel. This earth escape technique is understandable. The world is full of mud. No matter where you go, your feet can't leave the ground. If you cultivate the earth escape technique, you can go anywhere. Even the water escape technique is understandable. Let's not talk about how vast the sea is now. If I have the water escape technique, I may have a chance to escape. Even on land, water is common and can be used frequently. But what's the use of fire escape? Don't tell me I have to escape from someone's kitchen. Sigh, this guy's mind is only thinking about escaping. Of course, in the Shuawen Jie, the most obvious meaning of escape was to run away. He had used this book to enlighten himself, so the deepest impression he had was of course to run away. Moreover, wasn't the purpose of him cultivating the earth escape to escape? Suppressing the doubts in her heart, Zhang Xiaohua continued to read. After reading for a long time, she suddenly understood. Martial arts emphasized Qigong, while Immortal Tao emphasized escape techniques. Whether it was levitation, earth escape, flight, fire escape, etc., they were all in the category of escape techniques. In this world, everything was in the 5 elements. Correspondingly, there were 5 types of escape techniques: metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. The most common ones were earth escape, wood escape, and water escape, because these 3 elements existed in large quantities around people. With these 3 types of escape techniques, they basically satisfied the needs of Immortal Tao. Moreover, with the development of Immortal Tao, there were smart people who were more skillful and invented the 5 elements escape technique. No matter what the situation was, they could use the 5 elements to escape. Also, whether it was Immortal Tao or martial arts, everyone had a temperament. Which one of them didn't care about face? In martial arts, Qigong, other than the basic requirements of internal energy, many also paid attention to the elegance of one's posture. Many people even ignored the essentials and focused on elegant and graceful movement techniques. It was the same for Immortal Tao. Looking at others flying on swords and floating in the air, who would think of the basic 5 elements escape technique? Only when they had just entered the sect would they slightly cultivate escape techniques of different attributes. In fact, most cultivators would only comprehend the escape techniques of the 5 elements and feel that they were done. Venerable Fiery Dragon was the same. He had only cultivated the 5 elements escape technique. This fire escape technique was something that he had obtained from a barren place. He did not take it seriously and did not even treat it as a technique. That was why he kept it by his side and did not place it in his cave abode for his descendants. However, Venerable Fiery Dragon was known as Fiery Dragon. Naturally, he had his own unique attainments in fire spells. The barren island that he was stranded on was not an ordinary island. It was a volcano that was no longer erupting. In the cave on the barren island, there was a cave that led directly to the underground magma. With such favorable conditions, Venerable Fiery Dragon was able to absorb elemental energy to prolong his life. When he was bored, he would study spells. The Jade Blood Pill refining technique was one of them. Venerable Fiery Dragon had also cultivated the fire escape technique by chance. At the start, he did not feel anything different. However, as his cultivation increased, his understanding of the fire elemental energy became more thorough. He was surprised to find out that the meaning of the fire escape technique could not be replaced by the 5 elements escape technique. Although the 5 elements escape technique could make use of the 5 elements escape technique to escape, escape was only one aspect of the escape technique. Although the 5 elements escape technique could replace the function of the escape technique, it had lost the essence of the escape technique. However, Venerable Fiery Dragon did not know what this essence was. When he was about to search for this essence, he regrettably found out that he had only cultivated the 5 elements escape technique. He did not even know the incantations for the other escape techniques. If it was during normal times, such cheap techniques could be found everywhere. Even if it was thrown in front of him, Venerable Fiery Dragon would not even bother to use his divine sense. Now, Venerable Fiery Dragon was regretting. It seemed like there was a earth escape technique that he had never seen before in one of the cubicles in the cave. Among the 5 elements, fire and earth were mutually reinforcing and restraining. If he cultivated both, there might be an unexpected effect. Venerable Fiery Dragon even thought of the problem of his cultivation level. It was a pity that there was a saying, "There is no medicine for regret in this world." This saying was also suitable for immortal cultivators. In the end, Venerable Fiery Dragon did not find any insights in this area. He did not even have any guesses. However, he had mastered the fire escape technique, which was extremely rare among immortal cultivators. That was because Zhang Xiaohua was bored and playing with the flying sword to catch seabirds. How long had she been playing with the flying sword? How could Venerable Fiery Dragon have so much time to waste? Hence, many times, it was not only interest that was the foundation of success. Loneliness and boredom were also the paint of success. Venerable Fiery Dragon cherished his own cultivation experience. This time, he had left the fire escape technique and his own cultivation experience in this jade letter. He hoped that if someone was fated to obtain it, they would be able to bring it to greater heights. The fire escape technique is extremely rare. That was a story from 10,000 years ago. Now, even the water escape technique, wood escape technique and gold escape technique are unheard of. I was kind enough to obtain this earth escape technique. Now that I think about it, it was a close call. If some time had passed, the incantations of the earth escape technique would have disappeared. Zhang Xiaohua was a little pleased with himself. He secretly gave himself a thumbs up in his heart for his character. However, I have been practicing the earth escape technique for so long. Why have I not discovered any secrets? If I'm not careful, I'll end up as a barbecue Zhang Xiaohua. I've roasted and eaten a lot of seabirds. Don't tell me I've become their retribution. Forget it. Since no one knows any escape techniques now, I'll just use the earth escape technique. I'll be able to escape with my life. Oh, as long as I can avoid being tracked by experts. Zhang Xiaohua kept the jade letter in her hand. She then tried to unlock the restrictions on the other jade letters. However, no matter how hard she tried, she could not unlock them. Sighing, Zhang Xiaohua kept the jade letter in her hand. She then tried to unlock the restrictions on the other jade letters. However, no matter how hard she tried, she could not unlock them. Sighing, Zhang Xiaohua placed the remaining jade letters into her money bag. Since Venerable Fiery Dragon had placed such a profound restriction, he probably did not want her to unlock it before she reached a certain level of cultivation. Zhang Xiaohua's eyes lit up. Could there be something in there that could help her build her foundation? In the next few days, Zhang Xiaohua continued to practice the green blood elixir heart. Ever since the elixir heart was born in her Naiwan palace, she no longer felt a headache when she practiced the elixir heart. This made Zhang Xiaohua extremely happy. Although the headache was not an illness, it was still very painful. With the enhancement of her divine sense and the appearance of the elixir heart, she was able to control the flying sword better. The speed of the flying sword was almost twice as fast as before. Furthermore, she was able to control it more easily. Another 10 days passed. On this day, Zhang Xiaohua had finished her practice in the cave. She stood at the top of the mountain and looked at the sea. Looking at the seabirds flying above the sea, she could not help but have an idea. Speaking of the 5 elements escape technique, all of them were invisible to the eyes of others. The levitation technique, on the other hand, was to float in the air. When one practiced it to a high level, one would definitely be able to ride the wind. The lightness skill in martial arts must have been modified from riding the wind. If only Venerable Fire Dragon's jade bamboo slip had the flying technique, that would be great. Thinking of this escape technique, Zhang Xiaohua naturally thought of the fire escape technique that she could practice. Her curiosity was piqued. Fire escape technique, although there is a danger of being burnt to a crisp, but according to Venerable Fire Dragon's words, if I could master the fire escape technique, it would be greatly beneficial to the earth escape technique. Since I have nothing to do, I might as well try it. As long as I am careful, there might not be any accidents. Once her curiosity was piqued, it was as though her heart had grown hair. She could not hold it in any longer. She took out the jade bamboo slip from her purse. Without even returning to the cave, she started to read it from the top of the mountain. The fire escape technique was obviously more complicated than the earth escape technique. Not to mention the 18 incantations that needed to be cultivated, just the incantations alone had more than 1,000 words. It was extremely difficult to read. Luckily, she had the experience of comprehending the earth escape technique. Furthermore, most of the contents in the jade bamboo slip were the cultivation experiences of Venerable Fire Dragon. It had given Zhang Xiaohua a clear path for her to comprehend. It was much easier than trying to comprehend the earth escape technique by herself. Zhang Xiaohua first memorized the incantations of more than 1,000 words in her heart. Following that, she started to comprehend the incantations according to Venerable Fire Dragon's experience. Not knowing how long had passed, Zhang Xiaohua's right hand suddenly moved. Between her fingers, complex incantations appeared one by one. However, the true energy ball of the earth escape technique did not appear. Zhang Xiaohua was not in a hurry. After her fingers stopped moving, she pondered for a moment. Her right hand formed another incantation and her body disappeared. She had actually returned to the entrance of the cave. Now that the protective shield at the entrance of the cave had been broken by Zhang Xiaohua directly entered the cave. She walked to a corner of the cave and rubbed her chin as she pondered. The fire escape technique is different from the earth escape technique. It requires a special environment. This might be the reason why the fire escape technique is so rare in this world. Who would stay in such a hot environment for no reason? The earth lung fire below the cave is the best environment for cultivating the fire escape technique. If not for such an environment, Venerable Fire Dragon might not have been able to cultivate the fire escape technique to the great completion stage. However, he did mention clearly in the jade bamboo slip that although the earth lung fire is beneficial for cultivation, it is after all overbearing and can easily harm the body. If the fire escape technique has not been cultivated to a certain level, it is best not to enter it. I think it is better for me to cultivate the basics of the fire escape technique in this cave first. When I have the ability to protect myself, it will not be too late for me to enter. After thinking, Zhang Xiaohua returned to the stone bed and sat cross-legged. She then closed her eyes and started cultivating. This cultivation was not a big deal. Another year had passed. Zhang Xiaohua naturally did not only cultivate the fire escape technique. She did not neglect the Worry-Free Heart Sutra, Big Dipper Magical Fist, Jade Blood Pill Refinement Technique and other techniques. Even the Earth Escape Technique was frequently practiced when she was cultivating the Fire Escape Technique. Furthermore, Zhang Xiaohua also realized that Venerable Fire Dragon's deduction was quite reasonable. His Earth Escape Technique had actually improved slightly when he cultivated the Fire Escape Technique. Chapter 302. The fire escape technique was indeed exquisite. Zhang Xiaohua only managed to master it after a year. She had barely reached the most basic level that Venerable Fire Dragon had mentioned. Zhang Xiaohua came to the corner of the cave again and cast a spell to remove the restriction. After the restriction disappeared, a dark hole appeared in front of Zhang Xiaohua. A desolate, distant and extremely hot fire elemental energy rushed towards her. Zhang Xiaohua could not help but take half a step back. After getting used to it, she jumped into the hole. The hole was not deep and she landed on the ground after a short while. Zhang Xiaohua immediately released her divine sense. However, it seemed that there was a restriction around her and her divine sense could not reach far. My divine sense can now cover the entire island. However, it can't go further than a few feet. Why did Elder Hua set up such a restriction? As she thought, Zhang Xiaohua took out the luminous pearl. Under the dim light and her divine sense, she slowly walked forward. This was a slope that led downwards. Although it was rugged, there were no forks and she was not afraid of getting lost. During this period, Zhang Xiaohua had thought of using the earth escape technique. However, the restriction around her had restricted her from using the earth escape technique. Without any other choice, Zhang Xiaohua could only stagger down slowly. After a long time, she still could not see the bottom. Zhang Xiaohua could not help but be shocked. Wasn't she already at the bottom of the sea? After cultivating for so long, Zhang Xiaohua's temperament had already become firm. She was no longer jumping around and could only walk down patiently. She did not want to retreat. After a long time, the air was scorching hot. Zhang Xiaohua's body that was immune to cold and heat was also getting impatient. At this moment, Zhang Xiaohua finally understood why Venerable Fire Dragon had to cultivate the fire escape technique to a certain level before coming down. Zhang Xiaohua formed a spell with her right hand and a stream of qi flowed down from top to bottom. A thin layer of light red qi covered her entire body. Wasn't this the most basic spell of the fire escape technique? If he couldn't even grasp this, he wouldn't even be able to see the fire of the earth lung. After walking for a while, she saw a red light flickering in front of her. Zhang Xiaohua was relieved that she had arrived at the destination. Sure enough, after turning a corner, she saw a sea of fire twice the size of the small lake on the deserted island. Well, it would be more appropriate to call it the fire lake. The entire lake was dark red in color and was bubbling. Above the lake, there was a raging fire that was several feet tall. The fire was roaring and seemed to be burning for a long time. Zhang Xiaohua knew in her heart that this was the place where Venerable Fire Dragon cultivated his fire escape technique. Looking around, they were surrounded by rocks that were illuminated by the dark red light. Looking up, there was a space that was dozens of feet high. Above and all around were rocks, and under the illumination of the fire, it actually emitted a resplendent light. Zhang Xiaohua's eyes lit up, and his heart thumped. He released his divine sense with a whoosh. Sure enough, the resplendent lights were actually night luminescent pearls. No wonder old Fire Dragon's cave was decorated with luminous pearl. So this is where the treasure came from. There are so many luminous pearls. I'm rich. But, how do I collect this luminous pearl? Even if I use a small sword to pry it open, I won't be able to catch it. It's extremely easy for me to fall into this sea of fire. I better hurry up and cultivate my fire escape technique. For the sake of this luminous pearl, I will definitely learn it. After thinking about it, Zhang Xiaohua did not want to waste any more time. She kept the luminous pearl in her hands and made a gesture with her right hand. Pointing towards the sea of fire, a wisp of flame flew over and wrapped around the light film on her body. Zhang Xiaohua's gesture changed again and her body slowly melted like a candle. Following which, she merged with the wisp of flame. The flame immediately returned to the sea of fire and Zhang Xiaohua disappeared. But suddenly, a burst of black smoke rose and Zhang Xiaohua was shot out from another part of the flame. Half of her long hair was already burnt. Zhang Xiaohua helplessly touched her hair and consoled herself, since my hair is already long, I will have to use a small sword to cut it off. Let's just treat it as cutting it off now. Then, she sat cross-legged and closed her eyes to think about her gains and losses. A moment later, a smile crept onto his lips. He formed another hand seal, and his figure disappeared into the flames once more. Just like this, Zhang Xiaohua came out and went back in. She cultivated till night time before returning to the cave. As she pondered over her cultivation experience, she cultivated the Worry-Free Heart Sutra. The next morning, after she finished her routine cultivation, she went underground again to cultivate the fire escape technique. It was still the same old saying, cultivation knows no time. After another half a year, Zhang Xiaohua had basically learned the fire escape technique according to Venerable Fire Dragon's instructions. However, Zhang Xiaohua did not discover the secret that Venerable Fire Dragon had guessed. On this day, Zhang Xiaohua was sure that she had completed her cultivation of the fire escape technique and could appear anywhere in the flames. Only then did she release her flying sword and began her plan to make a fortune. She skillfully used her small sword to pry up a luminous pearl. When the luminous pearl fell, she estimated its landing point and used the fire escape technique to catch it. As she was not familiar with the first two luminous pearls, she did not catch them properly and fell into the sea of flames. This made Zhang Xiaohua's heart ache for a long time. She did not make any mistakes after that. That fire escape technique, under such intensive training, was much faster than the previous few days. Before the luminous pearl was completely pried off, Zhang Xiaohua's fire escape technique had reached a new level. She could appear at any precise location and her speed had also increased by a lot. Of course, if she was a little slower, the luminous pearl would have fallen into the sea of flames. That was a huge sum of silver. Zhang Xiaohua continued to pry up the luminous pearl and was very excited as she scuttled around in the flames. She was not careful and fell straight into the sea of flames. Zhang Xiaohua was shocked and immediately used the levitation technique to float towards the shore. When she landed on the ground, she heaved a sigh of relief. The flames in the sea of flames were formed by the red lava in the sea. How would she dare to provoke it? However, he immediately thought that the red lava was definitely not water. It should be rocks that were smelted at high temperatures. When he thought of the lava, he suddenly realized that although the lava could flow, it was still rocks. Since it was rocks, then the earth escape technique should be able to be used. The reason why the lava was in the form of lava was because there was a high-temperature fire in it. Since there are rocks and fire in the lava, then if I use both the earth escape technique and the fire escape technique at the same time, will I be able to enter the lava? Is this the secret that Venerable Fiery Dragon was talking about? He did not cultivate the earth escape technique and only cultivated the 5 elements escape technique and the fire escape technique. I think he would not be able to enter the lava, which is why his jade letter did not mention the lava. But, do I have to take the risk? Sigh, forget it. Let's get the night luminescent pearls first. Zhang Xiaohua calmed herself down and carefully kept the rest of the luminous pearl into her money bag. Then, she happily returned to the cave. On the second day, she returned to the underground. Zhang Xiaohua had already made up her mind. Actually, no matter if it was an immortal cultivator or a martial cultivator, they would not give up on the opportunity to increase their strength. They would also be willing to take the risk to increase their strength. Zhang Xiaohua was also the same. Although the lava was dangerous, it was obvious that the lava was a mixture of rocks and fire. Theoretically, as long as she combined the earth escape technique and the fire escape technique, she should be able to pass through the terrifying lava. Of course, although the lava was also a substance of the 5 elements, it was not something that could be subdued by the 5 elements escape technique, which was a jack of all trades. Furthermore, as her cultivation deepened, Zhang Xiaohua gradually understood that the path of immortal cultivator was a path of challenge. Challenging oneself, challenging the heavens and earth. The combination of the earth escape technique and the fire escape technique was an extension of the 2 techniques. More importantly, it was a challenge to oneself. It was a challenge to one's courage, cultivation and state. If she did not accept the challenge, it would leave a knot in her heart and it would be unfavorable for her future cultivation. Hence, after thinking for a long time, she finally came back. Sitting cross-legged in front of the sea of fire, Zhang Xiaohua pondered for a long time. What I need to do now is to combine the earth escape technique and the fire escape technique. But how should I combine them? Should I use both my left and right hands at the same time? My left hand has never practiced any techniques, so I don't think I can succeed in a short time. How about I use the earth escape technique first and escape into the earth below me, then immediately use the fire escape technique to enter the lava. Or I can use the fire escape technique to enter the flames first, then use the earth escape technique to enter the lava. There must be lava in the earth below me. I don't want to accidentally fall into it. Let's use the fire escape technique first, then enter the lava from the fire. After making up her mind, Zhang Xiaohua gritted her teeth, made a hand seal, and flashed into the flames. She stayed in the flames for a while, then made another hand seal for the earth escape technique. Her figure immediately disappeared from the flames, and when she reappeared, she was in the dark red lava. In the lava, Zhang Xiaohua looked worriedly at the black and red light membranes around her body. When she was sure that there was no problem, she tried to use the earth escape technique and the fire escape technique respectively. She found that these two techniques could be used in the lava. Zhang Xiaohua was overjoyed. She used the earth escape technique to swim in the lava. The two layers of light membranes excluded the dark red and extremely hot lava, so she was not hurt at all. However, in this lava, Zhang Xiaohua's divine sense was suppressed. She could not use her divine sense like she could in the flames or the earth. She could only extend her divine sense a few feet away. But even so, these few feet were extremely useful. She had already found traces of the luminous pearl on the stone wall beside the lava. It was even easier to pick the luminous pearl in the earth escape technique. As long as her divine sense locked onto it, she could use the earth escape technique and reach out her hand to pick it up. It was even more convenient than using a small sword. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohua forgot about the danger and greedily picked the luminous pearl, all the way into the depths of the lava. Chapter 303. Wasn't there a saying, extreme joy begets sorrow? When Zhang Xiaohua saw so many luminous pearls in the magma, his heart was overjoyed and he almost did a somersault in the magma. Moreover, this luminous pearl was easy to pick, it was as easy as lifting a finger. Zhang Xiaohua had plenty of strength. Hence, he followed the stone wall all the way down. The more he picked, the easier it was. Not knowing how long he had been going down, suddenly, Zhang Xiaohua's released divine sense encountered a strange yet familiar thing, divine sense. Another kind of divine sense. This divine sense was like a solidified rock, transmitting an incomparably majestic solemnity. Once Zhang Xiaohua's divine sense came into contact with it, a kind of throbbing came from the bottom of his heart. Although his divine sense hadn't seen anything, but a kind of feeling like an ant under a huge mountain immediately arose from his heart. Zhang Xiaohua's body trembled, the essential qi light shield on his body also rippled, almost bursting. Zhang Xiaohua didn't care about the luminous pearl that slipped from his hand. He immediately suppressed the throbbing in his heart and immediately withdrew his divine sense. His right hand hurriedly changed a spell, repairing the light shield before it collapsed. Because he withdrew his divine sense, the throbbing from the bottom of his heart seemed to have disappeared. Zhang Xiaohua didn't dare to go down again. That kind of feeling just now was really an indescribable feeling. It seems like a kind of fear and surrender from the bottom of my heart, a kind of instinctive bowing of head, or the feeling of seeing an absolutely powerful natural enemy. Yes, it must be. It's like when I was young, I was bitten by a snake in the field and then saw a snake again, but this feeling is 10,000 times stronger than before. Don't tell me there's a giant snake that eats people in here. Zhang Xiaohua's heart was somewhat hesitant, not hesitating whether to go back to the shore, but hesitating whether to release his divine sense again to see what exactly was outside. After pondering for a while, Zhang Xiaohua clenched her teeth and cast a spell. First, she flew upwards. Then, in a split second, she used all the essence of elixir in her Naiwen palace and released her divine sense to scan the area below. In an instant, boundless throbbing arose from the bottom of his heart, and even his path of retreat was changed. It was also in this instant that Zhang Xiaohua's consciousness forcibly passed through a large expanse of magma. He vaguely saw that it was a huge eye. An upright eye that was tightly shut. Zhang Xiaohua couldn't believe it. If the eye was so huge, how big would the body be? Moreover, this monster is obviously in a deep slumber and doesn't have any obvious consciousness. However, his unconscious and unintentional divine sense is so huge that it feels as heavy as a mountain. But that wasn't the crux of the matter. The crux of the matter was that as soon as I came into contact with this divine sense, I felt a sense of worship, helplessness, and fear. What exactly is this thing? Who cares, who cares? It seems like Venerable Fiery Dragon's jade bamboo slip didn't mention this monster. I think he probably didn't meet it before. Since it didn't wake up 10,000 years ago, it definitely wouldn't wake up now. Venerable Fiery Dragon cultivated in the sea of magma for such a long time without disturbing it. I don't think I'll wake it up. My character isn't that bad. Sigh, Venerable Fiery Dragon didn't go into the magma and naturally wouldn't disturb it. In the future, I won't go down too. Why did I go down so deep? Why didn't I reach the end after such a long time? Zhang Xiaohua didn't know that when he took the risk to observe, he had already deviated from his original path. However, he wasn't too anxious at this moment. After all, he was thinking of getting as far away from the monster as possible. As for where he was, as long as he was still on this island, no matter how deep he went, he still had the earth escape technique. Sure enough, when he really popped his head out of the sea of fire, the luminous pearls on his head clearly told him that he was lost. Zhang Xiaohua looked at the luminous pearl and grinned. His white teeth also revealed a trace of radiance. He didn't panic. First, he sat down cross-legged and slightly recovered his vital energy. After calming his heart, he released his divine sense. Indeed, he was already far away from Venerable Fiery Dragon's cave. His divine sense wasn't restricted and he easily found the cave above his head. Then, Zhang Xiaohua rubbed his hands and laughed as he stood up from the ground. He walked to the edge of the magma and at this moment, his eyes were attracted by something above the magma. What is that? It's black and it's actually floating in the air between the magma and the flames. Zhang Xiaohua first walked closer and took a closer look. It turned out to be a long sword, floating quietly in the air. If it was the previous Zhang Xiaohua, although he knew that this long sword was floating strangely, he might just raise his hand and grab it. However, ever since he saw Venerable Fiery Dragon's restriction, he felt a little respectful towards such things that went against common sense. Hence, he carefully released his divine sense and checked again. Indeed, the long sword was covered by a small restriction and it didn't block out his divine sense. Zhang Xiaohua looked at the long sword and felt a little strange. How is this a long sword? It's more like a thick stick. It just has the appearance of a crude sword. This is strange. Why can't my divine sense enter it? If it was an ordinary item, there would be a restriction that can't be entered. However, this long sword doesn't have any restriction and can't be entered. What is this strange thing? However, today, Zhang Xiaohua had seen many things that he had never seen before. He was already numb to it. This was just an inanimate object that couldn't be entered with his divine sense. He would just take a look at it later. After studying this restriction, Zhang Xiaohua was a little enlightened. This seems to be a simple array. It uses the fire elemental energy in the magma to refine this long sword. It doesn't have any restriction on being taken away. It must have been refined by someone in the past. However, I don't know the reason why it was left like this and no longer cared about. The long sword was very close to the shore and Zhang Xiaohua could reach it with his hand. However, he still carefully released his divine sense and observed it carefully. He used his right hand to conjure a spell and was ready to burrow into the ground if something went wrong. At the same time, he used his left hand to reach for the long sword. However, when his left hand grasped the end of the long sword, he didn't discover any changes in the small array. It must be purely used to refine the long sword. When the long sword entered his hand, it wasn't as hot as he imagined. Instead, there was an icy cold feeling in his hand. Zhang Xiaohua was overjoyed. He knew that this thing that had been refined in the hot magma for so long was actually icy cold. It must be a treasure that he didn't know about. However, when he tried to take it back, he couldn't lift it the first time. Oh? It's actually so heavy. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohua used another 50% of his strength to take out the long sword-like thing from the tempering array. Ever since Zhang Xiaohua started practicing the fist of the Big Dipper and started to hone his bones, the strength of his two arms became stronger and stronger. Now that he had cultivated to the 7th level of the fist of the Big Dipper, the strength of a single arm was close to 5,005 kilograms. Now, he actually had to use a few thousand kilograms of strength to lift this unremarkable long sword. How could he not be stunned? Holding this sword that weighed a few thousand kilograms in front of his eyes, he used the weak firelight in the space to carefully examine it once again. This was something similar to a sword embryo. It already had the appearance of a long sword, but it was more like a thick and long root. If it wasn't for the sharp protrusion at the front and the lack of length, it might as well be called a rod. The cold feeling in his hand was still there, but this coldness didn't seep into his skin. It was just a kind of internal coolness that made him feel comfortable holding it. It couldn't be seen from the surface. Zhang Xiaohua could only wave it a few times. Luckily, although this unremarkable long sword was very heavy, Zhang Xiaohua could still wield it. Looking at the stone wall beside him, Zhang Xiaohua used his strength to pierce the long sword into the stone wall. In his mind, it must be like piercing into tofu, incomparably nimble. Of course, weren't the peerless divine swords in the books all so skillfully and without workmanship? Unfortunately, the reality in front of his eyes greatly exceeded his expectations. The stone wall was pierced, but it was only a few inches. Some soil debris fell down. This was simply inferior to a normal long sword. Where was the elegance of a peerless divine sword? Zhang Xiaohua casually waved it a few times, clumsily making half a nondescript sword flower, and smiled bitterly. This is obviously a long rod, why did it have to look like a long sword? If it was a little longer, I might as well go to the Dalan temple and change the Dharma sword technique to the Dharma rod technique. At least it's better than this sword that can't even pierce through stone. Although this long sword didn't have any external appearance, and also didn't have any inner qualities, it was impossible for Zhang Xiaohua to spit out the item that was in his hands. Zhang Xiaohua thought for a while, and finally dismissed the idea of putting it into the space of the money pouch. This cumbersome thing weighed more than 5,000 kilograms, who knew if the money pouch could withstand it? The space of the money pouch was a secret that made Zhang Xiaohua smile when he thought of it. How could he carelessly test it? If for some reason it was spoiled, with so many good things, how was he going to take it? He casually stabbed the long sword into the ground, but no matter how hard he tried, it wouldn't go in. Zhang Xiaohua also didn't want to use brute force, so he could only throw it on the ground. Then, he released the small sword, made a gesture with his hands, and disappeared in the flames. He then excitedly pried up the luminous pearl on the rock wall. When the luminous pearl on the rock wall was all in the money pouch, and became Zhang Xiaohua's personal property, he then reluctantly picked up the long sword on the ground. In fact, Zhang Xiaohua knew in his heart that there must be a space like this underneath this deserted island, where he could pick up the luminous pearl. If it was before today, Zhang Xiaohua would have been burning with anxiety, and quickly released his divine sense to search for it. But just now, he had seen the power of the lava monster. That was a kind of instinctive surrender from the bottom of his heart, a kind of worship from a lower level to a higher level, a kind of fear that was engraved in his heart. How could he still have the courage to do something that would alarm the monster? Even if there was a chance, he wouldn't do it. Picking up the long sword, Zhang Xiaohua's eyes looked at the dark red lava. He slightly narrowed his eyes, and stared at it for a long time. The throbbing that made his hair stand on end, although it stopped him from doing anything, at the same time, it also aroused a trace of unyielding in the bottom of his heart. A thought spontaneously rose from the bottom of his heart, maybe, we will meet again. Chapter 304. Zhang Xiaohua returned to the mountaintop of the deserted island with the long sword. Breathing in the salty sea breeze, Zhang Xiaohua sighed with emotion. No wonder there were so few people who practiced the escape art. They spent their days digging holes in the ground. How could it compare to flying? He had only stayed below the island for less than a day. Even breathing in the sea breeze felt comfortable, not to mention constantly moving around underground. Sitting down with his legs crossed, Zhang Xiaohua checked his meridians. He realized that using the long sword to perform the earth escape technique required a few times more vital energy than using the earth escape technique alone. This was a huge price to pay. Forget it, forget it. I shall just keep it. Maybe when I get old, I can use it as a crutch. Zhang Xiaohua tried his best to convince himself not to throw it into the sea. Although the trip to the lava was not dangerous, it also proved that Venerable Fire Dragon was right about the special effects of the escape technique. Hence, in the next few days, other than practicing the earth escape technique and the fire escape technique, he would also perform the earth escape technique and the fire escape technique on the surface of the lava. Of course, this was only limited to the surface of the lava. He had no interest in disturbing the rest of the monsters. Even though he knew that there were many luminous pearls in the lava, he was not interested in them. Silver was not omnipotent. Without silver, one would not be able to do anything. However, for the sake of one's life, silver could be given up. After he had mastered the earth escape technique and the fire escape technique, Zhang Xiaohua focused on the cultivation of the prohibition technique and the formation. He still had 3 mysterious jade letters to unlock. Furthermore, he had already mastered the Worry-Free Heart Sutra, the Fist of the North Star, the Elixir Heart of Emerald Blood, the Sword Art, the Fire Escape Technique and the Earth Escape Technique to a certain extent. There would not be much improvement in the short term. Only the Prohibition Technique and the Formation seemed to be more useful as he mastered the Elixir Heart. He felt that there were many things that he needed to cultivate. Just like that, he chased the seabirds with the small sword when he was free. When he was busy, he used the lightning escape technique to train his muscles and bones. When he was bored, he used the earth escape technique to make fire. When he was in the mood, he used the elixir concoction technique. In the blink of an eye, a year had passed. At this time, it has grown wings. We can't catch up to it no matter how hard we try. That's homesickness. It's a poison that corrodes one's bones. There's no antidote in the world that can cure it. Zhang Xiaohua stood leisurely on the top of the mountain, looking at the rising sun and muttering to herself. It had been 4 years since she arrived on this deserted island. In the beginning, Zhang Xiaohua had carved marks in the cave to record the days. Later, she cultivated diligently and gradually forgot. However, with the passing of spring, summer, autumn, and winter, she could still tell that this was already the 5th spring and autumn. During these 4 years, Zhang Xiaohua himself did not notice how tall he had grown or how much his appearance had changed. He only knew that after daily practice and every rainy night, his carefree heart sutra had finally reached the edge of the 6th level of the refining qi realm. However, it was this edge that he could not break through. His progress in the Fist of the North Star also slowed down. Now he had reached the 8th level. Every time he practiced it twice, the flow would refine his bones. However, he could only refine his bones 9 times a day, not more than once. As for the elixir refining heart with green blood, the heart-like water droplet in his upper dantian was still the same. It seemed that there was no change, but the range of his divine sense had expanded, which meant that it was improving every moment. As for the elixir refining art, since his divine sense improved, his understanding of the elixir refining art had also improved. However, there were no herbs on this deserted island for him to try, but his control of the elixir furnace and the flame had reached an extremely fine level. Since he could use the earth escaping art and the fire escaping art at the same time, Zhang Xiaohua had further developed his own understanding. Through unremitting efforts, he could initially combine the incantations of the 2 escaping arts to form a black and red qi shield, or the fire escaping art. This kind of escaping art could be used in both fire and earth at the same time. Moreover, the speed of the escaping art was also much faster. However, the consumption of qi was also considerable. As for the flying sword art, with the increase of his divine sense and qi, the speed and range of the flying sword had increased a lot, but it was still an incomplete set of swordsmanship. What Zhang Xiaohua was most proud of was the Tao of restriction and formation. Normally, one would have to spend a lot of effort and time under the guidance of a master before they could achieve something. However, Zhang Xiaohua had achieved something in just 2 years. Now, he could set up simple restriction. Although he did not have any formation flag as a medium, he could roughly set up some small formation. Of course, it was the kind that could only be seen but not used. Furthermore, Zhang Xiaohua could already use the restriction incantation to set up some restriction incantation into the jade slip. In order to practice this, Zhang Xiaohua specially took out some jade slips that had already lost their vitality. Once these restriction incantations were set up, the jade slip would emit a fluctuation of vitality. However, this fluctuation was the fluctuation of the formation and not the original fluctuation of the jade slip. Of course, in these 4 years, Zhang Xiaohua had read the first jade slip that Fire Dragon Immortal had left behind. There were some spells that he could also use. For example, there was the fireball technique. He could easily release an egg-sized fireball in a cave or in a sea of fire. However, on this mountaintop, he could only release a small flame that would be extinguished immediately. In short, Zhang Xiaohua had achieved something that ordinary people would not be able to achieve in 10 years on this deserted island. This was not only because he was alone on this deserted island and could only focus on practicing, but also because he had cultivated an incredible elixir core which strengthened his divine sense as much as possible. It was also because he practiced day and night. Moreover, a night of practice or a rainy night of practice was equivalent to a few days of practice. Just based on this reason, 4 years of practice was equivalent to 8 years of practice for others. Moreover, the most important thing was that he missed his parents, his elder brother, his sister-in-law, and his second brother. He missed the people in the Misty School and the Huanxi Manor. He even thought of Brother Ma's smelly feet. The faint face that he often thought of in his dreams was even more unforgettable. In order to avoid these thoughts, he cultivated in a selfless manner. It was also this selfless manner that made him feel the bone-chilling longing while he was cultivating. Every time the sun rose, before he cultivated the Big Dipper magical fist, he would look at the horizon from afar and miss his family members who were far away. He would then criticize Fire Dragon Immortal in his heart. Why didn't you leave any flying escape technique in the jade slip? Even if you don't want to leave this deserted island, you still have to think about your descendants. He then put in more effort to cultivate the restriction and flying escape technique, hoping that one day he would be able to unlock a flying escape technique. After looking at the sun and missing his family members, Zhang Xiaohua was about to start cultivating the Big Dipper magical fist. Suddenly, he saw a red object floating towards the deserted island from afar. One side of the deserted island was facing the undercurrent. Every moment, there would be many things passing by the side of the island. However, most of them were aquatic plants, fishes, and floating wooden beams. It was the first time he saw such an eye-catching object. Zhang Xiaohua frowned and released his divine sense. He discovered that it was a person lying on a wooden beam. Zhang Xiaohua was overjoyed. He formed a seal and his body immediately disappeared. Not long later, he appeared on the beach by the sea. He stood with his hands behind his back and waited quietly for the person to float over. It was not that he did not want to save the person earlier. However, he cultivated the earth escape technique and the fire escape technique, not the water escape technique. Furthermore, the levitation technique could not allow him to stay in the air for a long time. How could he enter the water? Moreover, he also knew that the undercurrent was coming towards him. There was no need for him to do anything unnecessary. Sure enough, after a while, the undercurrent washed the person to the shore. Just as he was about to be swept away, Zhang Xiaohua reached out and fished him out of the water. This was a burly man about 30 years old. He was tall and had dark skin. His face was not too clear because it was somewhat deformed from being soaked in the water. Needless to say, this person had already lost his vitality. Zhang Xiaohua did not use his fingers to test his breath. With his divine sense, he already knew that he had no heartbeat and breath. However, Zhang Xiaohua still carefully turned him over. He lifted his red cloak and opened the clothes on his back. On his back, there was a big, black palm print deeply imprinted into his flesh. Zhang Xiaohua touched his chin and thought for a while. Then, he turned him over again. She saw that his right hand was tightly grasping the front of his clothes, as if he was afraid that something would fall out from his chest. After thinking for a while, Zhang Xiaohua reached into the man's chest and took out a money bag and a small metal box. She opened the money bag and looked at the things inside. Then, she put it back. Then, she carefully looked at the metal box in her hand. This was a very simple-looking metal box. There were some patterns engraved on it. There was a lot of rust on the edges of the metal box. It must be very old. There was also a very small iron lock on the metal box, tightly locking the box. There was no key in the money bag just now. Zhang Xiaohua had to lean over and search the man's chest again. Still, she did not find anything. He actually did not bring the key with him. This must be a valuable thing. Perhaps it is for someone else. What should I look at? Or not? Of course I have to look. If I don't look, how will I know who it is for? How can I help him to bring it there? In an instant, Zhang Xiaohua gave a very reasonable reason. So, he used his divine sense to scan the metal box. Knowing that there was no mechanism in this metal box, he reached out his right hand and took out the small sword. With a flash of the sword, the small lock fell down cleanly. When he opened the metal box, it was indeed very empty. There was only a rag-like thing at the bottom of the box. Zhang Xiaohua was surprised. I thought there would be some treasure. It is just a rag. Thinking, he reached into the box and took out the thing. Chapter 305. This was a piece of sheepskin with half of a mountain drawn on it. Looking at the incomplete picture and the torn edges of the sheepskin, he knew that this was part of it. Zhang Xiaohua first carefully looked at the picture in front of him, but did not find any clues. Then he turned the whole sheepskin over and over again, but did not find anything unusual. Strange, what is this? A treasure map? A will? Or an ink painting? Zhang Xiaohua muttered a little, and then he used his divine sense, which had never failed him. There was no fluctuation on the sheepskin, it was really an ordinary sheepskin. Zhang Xiaohua wanted to put it in his arms, but when he looked at the big man's pale face and his white hands that were tightly clutching his clothes, he sighed. There should be a principle in life. Seeing that the big man was clutching his clothes at the last moment, it must be a very important object. If he could find any useful clues from him, Zhang Xiaohua did not mind helping to send such an important thing back to fulfill this person's last wish. However, since he did not know the use of this sheepskin, it was better to let it rest with the big man. Anyway, the picture had been imprinted in his mind, there was no difference whether the sheepskin scroll was there or not. Well, I didn't mean to see it. Hero, I just wanted to help you fulfill your last wish. You should be able to rest in peace in the underworld. You should thank me. After thinking, Zhang Xiaohua put the sheepskin scroll into the iron box and put it back in the big man's arms. Looking left and right, he dragged the big man to a flat ground and said to himself, Hero, this place is surrounded by mountains and rivers. It can be considered a place with good feng shui. Although I don't know your last wishes, I think you are willing to be buried in peace. If you don't say anything, I will take it that you agree. Okay, I will bury you here. After that, he took out a small sword and was about to dig a hole in the ground. Suddenly, he patted his head. Didn't he have a long sword that he could use as a crutch in the future? Wouldn't it be better to use it to dig a hole? However, the long sword was indeed too heavy. Although Zhang Xiaohua was not afraid of its weight, he found it troublesome and had been throwing it in the cave. Now that he thought of it, he had to go back to the cave to get it. However, Zhang Xiaohua had the earth escape skill. With a twist of his body, he immediately disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already in front of the cave. When he entered the cave, he picked up the long sword from the stone table and thought of another thing. Why do I always have to bury people when I come to this deserted island? First, it was Elder Hua's ashes. Now, it is a big man that I don't know. It seems like these two people are fated to be buried by me. Why don't I bury them together? If they are in heaven, wouldn't they be thanking me every day when they meet each other after 10,000 years? Zhang Xiaohua was secretly praising his own idea. He held the long sword in his hand and levitated in the air. He came to the place where Venerable Fiery Dragon was buried. He threw the long sword aside and went back to the beach to pick up the burly man. Ever since he got the long sword, this was the first time he found something useful. It was to dig a hole for someone. Well, not bad. Digging a hole was a skill, regardless of whether it was a big hole or a small one. Not to mention, this long sword was quite handy for digging a hole. It was much more convenient than the small sword. Making the best use of everything. Was this the saying? As Zhang Xiaohua dug the hole, he hummed a tune. Yes, it was the tune of "Sister, You Are Sitting at the Front of the Boat." Who asked him to not know much? After he finished digging the hole and threw the big man in, Zhang Xiaohua clasped his hands together and murmured, "Hero, rest in peace. Beside you is an all-powerful celestial elder from 10,000 years ago. I don't know, in your previous life, oh, wrong, it should be. I don't know. 10,000 years should be your life. You had fate with this elder. Today, both of you are still next to each other. It can be considered a perfect ending to your life. Alright, I won't say much. I don't know your name and I don't know if you are a good person or a bad person. However, is there a difference between a good person and a bad person? Well, you don't have to answer. Rest in peace." After he finished, he sprinkled the soil from the side of the hole on the big man and slowly buried him. This hole could be considered to be filled again. Well, it was quite simple. After the small episode of digging and filling the hole, Zhang Xiaohua's cultivation life returned to normal. Originally, he thought that there were traces of injuries on the big man's body. He thought that it was the result of a fight in the sea. If it was a vendetta or a robbery, there would definitely be follow-up pursuit. If someone could catch up to him, there would be a possibility of him returning. However, after waiting for another 2 days, there was no trace of anyone. Zhang Xiaohua could not help but feel a little disappointed. Could it be that his guess was wrong? This big man just happened to fall into the undercurrent like himself and lost his trace. Was that why no one found him? He could not help but blame the big man. You should have left some clues. One can't be too smart. Don't you think so? For the sake of me burying you, it's better to attract people. Although he complained, he still had to continue cultivating. The flame of returning had just been ignited, but it was strangled by the ruthless reality. So pitiful. The ancients said that good. Cough, cough. It had been a long time since he said that. At the end of the road, there was a glimmer of hope in the dark. This morning, Zhang Xiaohua was in the cave. He closed his eyes and meditated, quietly comprehending the way of array formations. Suddenly, he felt something in his heart. His divine sense spread out like a big net and looked at the sea around the deserted island. Suddenly, Zhang Xiaohua opened his eyes in surprise and stopped the incantation in his hand. Without caring about his image, he floated up from the stone bed and did a few somersaults in the air. Ha 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 ha, he laughed loudly and landed on the ground. Then, with a twist of his body, he disappeared on the spot. Not long after, he appeared on the top of the mountain. He shaded his eyes with his hand and looked into the distance. He saw that in the direction of his gaze, a huge boat was slowly moving towards the deserted island. For a moment, Zhang Xiaohua's heart was filled with an indescribable feeling. Nervous? Surprised? Timid? In short, Zhang Xiaohua was extremely excited at this moment. Suddenly, his heart skipped a beat. He disappeared from the spot and returned to the cave. He looked around and walked to a corner of the cave. He jumped into the cave and hurried to the side of the sea of fire to make sure that he didn't forget anything. Then he returned and sealed the cave with a restrictive spell. Then he took the long sword on the stone table and the luminous pearl from the stone wall. The whole cave fell into darkness. Zhang Xiaohua went out of the cave and activated the restrictive spell at the entrance of the cave with a spell. Then he used the earth escape to the earliest cave. That cave was dark and small. It didn't look like someone lived in it. Zhang Xiaohua frowned and went to the field of Solomon's essence. He casually plucked a few stalks of Solomon's essence. Without removing the leaves and soil, he returned to the cave and threw them aside. Then, after thinking for a while, he threw the long sword in too. Then he returned to the top of the mountain. The speed of that huge boat was actually very fast. In a short while, it was clearly visible. Zhang Xiaohua used his divine sense to scan it again. He couldn't help but frown. This huge boat was one size smaller than the one in the Southern Sea Serpent Palace. There were no flags on the mast and there weren't as many people below the deck as there were in the Southern Sea Serpent Palace. However, there were many martial arts experts in the cabin. This was obviously not an ordinary boat. It was very likely that it was looking for the burly man who drifted over a few days ago. However, he didn't know if it was for revenge or for him. Zhang Xiaohua narrowed his eyes and rubbed his chin. He was thinking. If it was for him, it would be easy. He would bury him and they would be deeply grateful. If it was for revenge, it would be for the burly man's belongings. He didn't know if they would find out that he had opened it rashly. He still had to think of a way to deal with it. Forget it. What's there to think about? I'll just pretend that I don't know. These people won't believe me no matter what I say. Why should I think too much? After making up his mind, Zhang Xiaohua didn't think too much about it. He just wanted to take the boat back. What did their grudges have to do with him? After a long while, the boat was nearing. The people in the cabin had already walked out and started pointing at the deserted island. When they were about to see him, Zhang Xiaohua raised his hand and waved. Sure enough, in his divine sense, the group of people were panicking. Many people came out of the cabin and even came up from below the deck. They looked at Zhang Xiaohua on the top of the mountain and pointed at him, saying something. Then, the boat stopped there. Zhang Xiaohua was secretly happy. Suddenly, he felt a trace of worry. What was going on with this boat? If it didn't approach the deserted island, what should he do? However, he was really worried about his gains and losses. Since the boat had already reached the deserted island, how could it return empty-handed? As a matter of fact, a small boat was lowered from the side of the ship. 2 sailors disembarked from the boat, and 2 other martial arts experts also floated down and landed on the small boat. Zhang Xiaohua suddenly realized that he had forgotten that the giant boat was very deep in the water. This deserted island couldn't be approached, so they could only let the small boat come. After thinking about it, Zhang Xiaohua used the levitation technique from the top of the mountain and slowly went down the mountain, just like the ordinary qigong in the martial arts world. When the small boat reached the shore, he had just gone down the mountain. The 2 people on the small boat were more anxious than him. Without waiting for the boat to stop, they both used their qigong to come ashore. First, they looked at Zhang Xiaohua's qigong footwork. Then, they looked at each other and a smile appeared on their faces. They floated up to meet him. When they got closer, the 2 people stopped and carefully looked at Zhang Xiaohua who was running over. This was a very ordinary young man, about 15 or 16 years old. He wasn't short, about the same height as them, but he looked a little stronger. He had a short beard on his lips, and his hair was messy. At first glance, it was obvious that he had casually tidied it. He was barefoot and empty-handed. His eyes looked very bright, and he was wearing a black robe that seemed a little too big. Chapter 306. When this ordinary-looking youth ran in front of them, the 2 looked at each other. One of them was a skinny, white-faced man in his mid-20s. He cupped his hands and said, "Excuse me, brother, can you understand what we are saying?" Bang! Zhang Xiaohua, who was full of hope, almost fell to the ground. "What are you talking about?" Why can't I understand what you are saying? But when Zhang Xiaohua opened his mouth to speak, he really did understand what this person meant. I can understand. Zhang Xiaohua's speech was actually a bit jerky. That was because he had stayed on this deserted island for more than 4 years. There was no one around him, so it was impossible for him to communicate with others. How could he be so fluent? Even if he was looking at jade slips and talking to himself, he was just mumbling. When had he ever talked to others so loudly? Hearing Zhang Xiaohua's words, the pale-faced man turned his head to look at the burly yellow-faced man beside him. After exchanging glances, the pale-faced man smiled and said, "Look, this little brother has also stayed on this deserted island for many days. Did you encounter some kind of storm and end up here? Is this little brother the only one on this deserted island?" Zhang Xiaohua bared his teeth and said, "Yes, I, a few years ago, went out to sea, encountered a big storm. The ship sank. I also fainted. When I woke up, I drifted to this deserted island." After saying a few words, Zhang Xiaohua's speech gradually became fluent. The yellow-faced man beside him looked very honest. He asked in a low, muffled voice, "Is this little brother the only one on this deserted island? What is this little brother's name? Where are you from?" Zhang Xiaohua said, "I am from Jinhua City. Big brother, you can call me Ren Xiaoyao. I have followed my family out to sea since I was young to make a living. Last time, unfortunately, the storm was really bad. I guess I am the only one who escaped. I am the only one who ended up on this deserted island. May I know who these two big brothers are?" The white-faced man said, "Little brother is really lucky. I am Chai Feng of Shinrong Gang's Luo River Hall. This is my senior brother, Bai Yonggui." Zhang Xiaohua smiled and cupped her hands. "Greetings to the two heroes of Jianghu." Bai Yonggui glanced at him and said with a smile, "Brother Ren also has good martial arts. Why did you go out to sea when you were young?" Zhang Xiaohua said, "Master Bai, you flatter me. I'm just trying to make a living. That's why I learned a little bit of Qigong. I've let you two laugh at me. What kind of internal energy have you practiced?" "Reckless bull's strength." "Oh, so that's the case. Little brother, since you can use Qigong, your Nigong cultivation is also not bad. Where did you learn it from? What sect do you have?" "Sect?" Zhang Xiaohua smiled bitterly and said, "I won't hide it from you two big brothers. I used all my belongings to exchange for a book of Reckless Bull's Strength from someone who claimed to be from Misty School. That person casually gave me some pointers and I have a little bit of internal energy. I can barely use Qigong. I just wanted to escape and didn't want to learn anything. You see, I accidentally wandered here. Even if I have Qigong, what can I do?" "Misty School?" The two men's expressions changed greatly when they heard this. They said at the same time, "Misty School? What did that person look like? When did you see him?" Zhang Xiaohua's heart skipped a beat. She frowned and said, "Let me think. It should be when I was 7 or 8 years old. It was 10 years ago." When the two men heard this, their expressions relaxed and they looked at each other. Zhang Xiaohua continued, "It was a man in ragged clothes. His face was sallow, as if he hadn't eaten for more than 10 days. He made me treat him to meals for several days in vain." The two men were even more relaxed. The pale-faced Chai Feng smiled and said, "Brother Ren, you were probably fooled. That Misty School is a big sect in the martial arts world. 10 years ago, it was at its peak. How could there be such a sloppy person? If you met him in the past 2 years, it might be true. 10 years ago, it definitely wasn't. Why would it be possible in the past 2 years?" Zhang Xiaohua was a little surprised and was about to ask. The yellow-faced Bai Yonggui interrupted, "Brother Ren, how many years have you been here?" "It should be 4 years. Hero Bai, I've been muddle-headed. Spring, summer, autumn, and winter should be 4 years. Ah! So long. The two men were surprised and their eyes flashed with a strange light. Then, Chai Feng probed, Brother Ren, can we take a look at the place where you live? Zhang Xiaohua thought, hee, you're here. I expected it and was waiting for you. On the surface, he looked uneasy and said, Heroes, I live in a very simple and crude place. There's no need to look. Chai Feng smiled and said, Brother Ren, don't worry. We just admire you for staying on this deserted island for so long. We just want to see how you live. Zhang Xiaohua nodded and said, Then, please follow me. After he finished speaking, he led the way using his qing gong. Looking at the somewhat clumsy Zhang Xiaohua in front, the two men smiled and followed behind. Zhang Xiaohua released his divine sense and saw the two men's expressions clearly. His heart was even more nervous. Sure enough, after the two men saw the simple and uninhabited cave, they asked, It seems that you live here alone. However, how do you fill your stomach? Zhang Xiaohua pointed to the sealwort by the lake and said, There's a field of sweet potatoes over there. They're very delicious. I often went to the countryside to play in Jinghua City and saw others planting them. That's how I saved my life. Since they knew it was sweet potatoes, the two men were too lazy to look. After all, they had only heard of it and knew that it was a wild animal that the villagers often ate. Then, Chai Feng looked at Bai Yongui and asked softly, Brother Ren, I want to ask you something. If you know, please tell me truthfully. If this matter can be fulfilled by you, we will definitely thank you. Of course, if you don't know, it's okay. We will also bring you back to the colorful world of the land. Really? Hero Chai, please say it. I will tell you everything I know. At this time, Bai Yonggui's voice was trembling as he asked, During this period, did you see anyone or a corpse drifting to the deserted island? After that, Bai Yonggui and Chai Feng stared nervously at Zhang Xiaohua, looking forward to his answer. Yes. Zhang Xiaohua answered firmly. The two men were overjoyed. Chai Feng asked, Brother Ren, where is that person? What does he look like? What does he look like? He was wearing a red cloak. I don't remember what he looked like. His face was soaked in water, so I didn't look carefully. Ah! Then where is his body? Where is it? He's already dead. Why would I keep him? He drifted away with the current. What? The two men shouted at the same time. You let him go. Bai Yonggui took a step forward, grabbed Zhang Xiaohua's arm and said, When did this happen? Why didn't you fish him out? Zhang Xiaohua pretended to be in pain and said, Hero Bai, can you be a little less forceful? Chai Feng hurried forward and pulled Bai Yonggui away. He advised with some regret, Senior Bai, Brother Ren didn't know the importance of this person. It's just a corpse. You don't have to blame him. Bai Yonggui said angrily, but. After a while, he couldn't say anything. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua rolled his eyes and said, Is this person very important? Chai Feng smiled bitterly and said, Of course he's important. Otherwise, us brothers and the brothers on the ship behind us wouldn't have come to this deserted island. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, That's good. Hero Chai, since this person is so important to you, I'm relieved. In fact, if I didn't say anything, you would have brought me on the ship. Of course, you might not have let me on the ship. This little one is alone and doesn't have the ability to let you two heroes bring me. When these words came out, the two were surprised and happy. They were happy because the situation seemed to have taken a turn for the better. The youth in front of them seemed to know the whereabouts of the red-cloaked man. They were surprised because this youth was so sophisticated and didn't trust people as easily as other young men. Of course, this surprise immediately dispelled the last of their doubts. Of course, which of the youths who lived on the sea for years wasn't a sly person? How could they be so easily fooled by their promise? Ren Xiaoyao, being so careful, explained his identity. He was a youth from Jinghua City who lived on the sea. After making up his mind, Chai Feng smiled and said, Brother Ren, it seems that you still don't trust us. We brothers will swear an oath. If we don't bring Brother Ren to land, we will die under Brother Ren's sword. What do you think? Zhang Xiaohua looked at Bai Yonggui. The seemingly honest and considerate Bai Yonggui immediately nodded his head. Zhang Xiaohua pondered for a moment and laughed inwardly. It seems that these two still have a trick up their sleeves. They obviously know that I know Qinggong, but who knows if I know swordsmanship or not. They are very crafty and slippery. However, he nodded his head and sincerely said, since the two great heroes have said so, this little one also knows that the great heroes of Jianghu are all true to their words. They certainly won't be willing to go back on their words. This little one naturally believes you. Then, he pointed to a place not far away and said, that red-clothed man was buried by this little one there. When Bai Yonggui heard this, he was overjoyed and said, that's great. Brother Ren, this is one of this little one's martial brothers. You have preserved his corpse. Our Luo River Hall is endlessly grateful. Zhang Xiaohua modestly said, in the eyes of great hero Bai, it was just a small matter. Let's go, I will take you there. Finished speaking, he picked up his long sword from the ground and brought the two people to the place where the red-clothed man was buried. Zhang Xiaohua pointed to the slightly raised ground and said with a smile, Great hero Bai, do you think I should dig up your martial brother's corpse? Bai Yonggui looked at the stick in Zhang Xiaohua's hand and cupped his hands, then I will have to trouble you, little brother. You are welcome, great hero Bai. Finished speaking, Zhang Xiaohua stuck out his butt and began to work hard at digging a hole. He was the one who buried the corpse, so he was naturally aware of it. His skillful farming methods once again dispelled the two people's doubts. That's right, which Jianghu person had such a level of digging? Chapter 307. When the burly man's body was dug out, even though it had been buried for a few days and there was a stench, the two's eyes lit up, just like Zhang Xiaohua's expression when she saw the luminous pearl. Bai Yonggui glanced at Chai Feng and said to Zhang Xiaohua with a smile, Brother Ren, the two of us will tidy up the remains of my senior brother. You can go to the cave and tidy it up. When you're done, we'll return to the ship and send you back to land. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, Okay, hero Bai. This little one has the same idea. I was in a hurry just now and there are things in the cave that I haven't tidied up. After she finished speaking, she cupped her hands and walked towards the cave with her long sword in hand. Bai Yonggui and Chai Feng were able to endure it. When Zhang Xiaohua's figure disappeared from their sight, they quickly turned the burly man over and covered their noses. They found the money pouch and iron box from his chest and searched the burly man's body for a long time. After making sure that they didn't miss anything, they checked the money pouch. When they saw the iron box without the iron lock, they were stunned and nervous. It wasn't until they opened the iron box and saw the sheepskin scroll inside that they were wild with joy. Bai Yonggui took it and looked at it carefully. He said to Chai Feng, Junior brother Chai, it seems that this is the real thing. However, why is this box open? I heard from Tan Chi that this iron box and key were held by Tan Wen and Tan Wu respectively. Where did the iron lock go? Chai Feng smiled and said, maybe Tan Chi heard wrongly. He's just a servant. How could he know so much? Anyway, this thing is already in our hands and we brothers have done a meritorious deed. We just have to wait for our reward when we return. It's better to leave this troublesome matter to gang leader. Bai Yonggui also grinned and said, that's how it should be. Then, he frowned and said, Junior brother, how do you think we should deal with this Ren Xiaoyao? This Tan Wen was fished out from the sea by him. Maybe he has already seen this thing. That's right, maybe he was the one who removed the iron lock. Chai Feng laughed involuntarily and said, didn't you see that he looks like a brat running around the sea? This kind of narrow-mindedness can't be faked. Moreover, he had stayed on this island for 4 years. How would he know about the matters of the Jianghu? Even if he did, he wouldn't be able to understand the meaning of the parchment. Besides, he helped us find this sheepskin scroll. We owe him a debt of gratitude. We can't be ungrateful. But what if he leaks the news? If this news were to spread to the Jianghu, it would set off a huge wave. Well, let's bring him to land first. Our brothers are all on the ship. Let's hear their opinions. Well, I'm still not at ease. What if the sect leader blames me? Wouldn't you blame us for being incompetent? Senior brother Bai, I think it's best if you keep these things first. Take them with you. I think that kid will be back soon. When Bai Yonggue heard this, he hurriedly put the iron box and the money pouch into his bosom. Sure enough, at this moment, Zhang Xiaohua's figure came down from the hillside. Chai Feng raised his voice and laughed. Brother Ren, are you done packing? I'm done packing. Are we leaving now? Let's go now. After that, the two of them lifted their legs and were about to leave. Zhang Xiaohua curiously asked, two heroes? Don't you want the remains of your senior brother? Both of them looked embarrassed. Chai Feng hesitated and said, well, we want to go to the ship to find something so that we can carry his body to the ship. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, it's not that troublesome. Let me do it. I think the two of you have never done such a thing before. After that, he walked to the front of the big man and wrapped the big man's body in his own cloak. He lifted his hand and carried it on his shoulder. Then he picked up his sword from the ground and said, two heroes, let's go. After that, he lifted his leg and walked in front, leading the way to the seaside. The two of them looked at each other in dismay and hurriedly caught up from behind. After walking for a while, Bai Yonggue gently pulled Chai Feng and made a chopping hand gesture. Chai Feng shook his head. Bai Yonggue gritted his teeth and made a strange hand gesture to Chai Feng. Chai Feng looked at it and frowned. He sighed softly and seemed to have compromised. Seeing this, Bai Yonggue gently pulled out his sword from his waist. Chai Feng also helplessly took out his sword. Bai Yonggue gestured and called out to them. From behind Zhang Xiaohua, he straightened his body and stabbed at Zhang Xiaohua's back. Chai Feng's sword also helplessly stabbed at Zhang Xiaohua's shoulder. Seeing that the sword was about to stab, Zhang Xiaohua's body tilted and the big man's body happened to block Bai Yonggue's sword. Bai Yonggue was shocked and quickly withdrew his sword. Seeing this, Chai Feng also took the opportunity to withdraw his sword. They heard Zhang Xiaohua say without turning her head, two heroes, be careful. There are a lot of stones on the ground here. Don't be like me. You must pay attention to your feet and don't sprain your ankle. Saying this, she didn't relax her feet and quickly walked to the top of the mountain. Bai Yonggue and Chai Feng were bewildered and stopped in place. They didn't know what to do as they watched Zhang Xiaohua's figure gradually pull away. Then, Bai Yonggue clenched his teeth and narrowed his eyes. He was about to rush forward when Chai Feng saw this and quickly pulled him back. He whispered, Senior brother Bai, it's too late. That brat has already reached the top of the mountain. If we launch a sneak attack from behind, we'll be ridiculed by the other brothers. Bai Yonggue was shocked. When he looked up, he saw that the youth had already reached the top of the mountain. They could see him from the boat. If he launched a sneak attack, he would be able to claim credit in front of the gang leader. However, he would lose all face. If he and Chai Feng had just left the youth here, no one would know. Chai Feng had also attacked from behind, so he naturally wouldn't reveal it. However, if he were to do this now, it would definitely not work. Alas, that stone on the road just now was really a coincidence. Bai Yonggue fiercely glared at Zhang Xiaohua's back and quickly followed Chai Feng to catch up. How could he know that the unremarkable country youth in front of him had already seen everything through his divine sense and was secretly sneering in his heart? The three of them arrived at the seaside. The small boat was still waiting for them. On the large boat in the distance, everyone saw a youth carrying a red object on his shoulder. It was very strange and they all pointed at him. Zhang Xiaohua stood beside the small boat and carefully sized it up. She secretly muttered to herself. Although this is a small boat used to ferry people, it's not much smaller than the river boat used by the Southern Sea Dragon Palace in Jinghua City. It must be specially used at sea. And it should be able to withstand the weight of a long sword. Presumably, she exerted force with her feet and jumped up from the ground onto the small boat. As Zhang Xiaohua's figure landed, the entire small boat sank into the water with a whoosh. The two people on the boat were shocked. They were sailors on the boat and were used to seeing things on the water. A strange thought emerged in their hearts. What the hell? This youth is so thin, but why is he so heavy? It feels like even an elephant isn't this heavy. Bai Yonggui and Chai Feng were also stunned when they saw this. However, they didn't have the same intuition as the two sailors. They only thought that it was caused by Zhang Xiaohua carrying the large man's corpse. At the same time, they thought, this youth's qinggong is really ordinary. Moreover, he looks quite thin, but there's quite a lot of meat on his body. Thinking about this, the two also floated onto the boat. The small boat didn't move at all. When they returned to the boat, the two sailors were exhausted. How could they not be tired when there were only two people on this small boat that weighed 5,000 to 6,000 kilograms? As a result, the time taken to return was actually several times longer than before. When they finally reached the boat, the two sailors were so tired that they almost foamed at the mouth. Chai Feng saw the side of the boat and asked, "Brother Ren, can you go up by yourself? If you can't, ask them to lower the rope." Zhang Xiaohua thought to herself, lower the rope? That's even more impossible. I don't know how many people are needed to get this long sword up. She said, I'll try, Hero Chai. If I can't get up, it won't be too late to use the rope. After that, she exerted force with her feet. The small boat swayed again and sank a lot. Then, Zhang Xiaohua's figure shot straight towards the boat like a bullet. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua move forward, the two didn't hesitate and quickly followed. Zhang Xiaohua stood steadily on the boat with the big man's corpse on her back. Even the boat was slightly tilted to one side. At this time, there were about a dozen people surrounding them. When Zhang Xiaohua saw this, she was about to speak. Bai Yonggui jumped up and said, Junior Brother Li, come here. Quickly help to carry Senior Brother's corpse back to the cabin. Senior Brother? Corpse? A dark-skinned fatty who was half a head shorter than Zhang Xiaohua scratched his head and said. Then, he saw Bai Yonggui's eyes and immediately understood. He said, okay, I understand. Senior Brother Bai, I'll immediately carry Senior Brother's corpse back to the cabin. After that, he stepped forward and frowned as he took the corpse on Zhang Xiaohua's shoulder. At this time, Chai Feng also walked forward and said, Brother Ren, thank you for carrying Senior Brother's remains up here. You must be tired. Go wash up in the cabin, eat something, and rest. We brothers will hold a banquet to express our gratitude to you in the evening. Zhang Xiaohua cupped her hands and said, Thank you, Hero Chai. Chai Feng called over a sailor and gave him some instructions. The sailor led Zhang Xiaohua to a room on the second floor of the cabin and left. Not long after, he came back with a bathtub filled with hot water and many snacks. After the sailor closed the door and left, Zhang Xiaohua laughed loudly. She carefully placed the long sword at her feet, threw off her clothes, and jumped into the bathtub to wash. Zhang Xiaohua was also a person who was about to reach the 6th layer of qi refining. Her body was filled with true qi and there was no dust on her body. Even the impurities in her body had been purified long ago. She didn't need to take a bath. However, when she saw something that she hadn't used in 4 years, she couldn't help but feel happy and wanted to enjoy it. Chapter 308. After Zhang Xiaohua finished his bath and tidied up his appearance, he sat comfortably on the chair and tasted the desserts that had been delivered. It wasn't a big deal, but he almost bit off his tongue. Ever since Zhang Xiaohua's cultivation entered the 5th layer of qi refining, he no longer needed to eat food. However, he still occasionally ate some sealwort to refresh his mouth. Seeing the desserts that he hadn't eaten in 4 years, his appetite was naturally aroused and he finished them all. After he finished eating the desserts, he withdrew his divine sense and sneered in his heart. he closed his eyes and began to cultivate, no longer paying attention to the others. In the cabin downstairs, a dozen or so Xian Rong faction disciples were arguing incessantly. No one was able to convince anyone. The majority, led by Yonggui, unanimously believed that they should kill this youth of unknown origin here and then throw him into the sea. On the other hand, the minority, led by Chai Feng, believed that even though there was a possibility that this youth would leak information, they had promised to bring him back to land after all. Furthermore, they had also made a poison oath. It was best to escort him back to the faction and let the sect leader make a decision. After arguing for a long time, Chai Feng gradually fell into a disadvantageous position. He was originally part of the minority and wouldn't argue with his fellow disciples over this youth. After all, he was a member of the sect and would have to live in the sect in the future. It was best to close one eye to things that he couldn't control. AI, how much can conscience be worth in this day and age? Seeing Chai Feng compromise, Yonggui smiled. This time, they were able to obtain the sheepskin scroll from the deserted island. However, as for the punishment of the unfamiliar youth on the deserted island, if his opinion was adopted, it would naturally overshadow Chai Feng's. When they returned to the sect, he would naturally be the first to receive a reward based on merit. How could he not fight for such an opportunity? But what about the innocent youth's life? How could she be worthy of his attention? What followed was naturally to discuss how to make their move. Of course, this discussion was only to add some fun to the boring journey. Or perhaps they wanted to find a reason for their conscience. In short, it didn't take long for them to agree to make their move after dinner. Although Zhang Xiaohua was cultivating and did not release his divine sense, how could he put these people in his eyes at this time? If it weren't for the fact that he wanted to board this ship, he would have already made his move when Yonggui ambushed him on the deserted island. Why would he wait until now? Since they had already waited until now, why would they be afraid of a little trick? When it was already late, a sailor came up to invite Zhang Xiaohua downstairs for dinner. Zhang Xiaohua originally did not want to go downstairs, but with her spiritual awareness, she sensed that everyone downstairs was in high spirits, as if they wanted to watch a good show. She could not help but think, they have just boarded the ship, and there is still a long way to go. If I don't teach them a lesson first, there may not be peace in the future. Alas, the tree wants to be quiet, but the wind will not stop. By the time Zhang Xiaohua followed the sailors down to the cabin, all the wine had already been prepared. Although it was far from being as luxurious as the Southern Sea Flood Dragon Palace, it was still a rare sight on this vast sea. Just like before, there was no place for Zhang Xiaohua at the head of the table. There was only a place left for him at the end of the table. Moreover, when he came down, the banquet had already begun. How could there be an empty seat? Zhang Xiaohua stood in front of the door and smiled as she looked at everyone in the hall. She cupped her hands at them and sat down without any trace of politeness. The people of the Xian Rong faction did not show any abnormalities because of her appearance. Instead, as everyone drank and ate, their eyes revealed a hint of playfulness. Only Chai Feng, who sat at the head of the table, had an apologetic expression. He looked at Zhang Xiaohua a few times with unease. Although Zhang Xiaohua's head was lowered, she had already released her divine sense. Everyone in the hall could see clearly. Moreover, this banquet had clearly stated that they wanted to thank her. However, they did not wait for her to come down before starting the banquet. They also did not introduce her to everyone. Clearly, they treated her like a dead person. Everyone's etiquette had been stripped away, leaving behind only naked ugliness. She sighed again. Alas! For some reason, Zhang Xiaohua sighed a lot more today. Was it because she was getting older? Zhang Xiaohua secretly scratched her head. Of course, after freshening up and taking a closer look, she realized that she was no longer the childish youth from 4 years ago. If she walked in front of Pulsatilla Wang now, he might not be able to recognize her. That's right. I wonder what the result of the battle at sea was. Did the navy of Jingyue City win, or did the Southern Sea Serpent Palace win? However, what does this have to do with me? I am Ren Xiaoyao, who has already been buried in the belly of a fish. Just now on the deserted island, I still called myself Ren Xiaoyao. I won't leave any evidence behind, right? It doesn't matter. It's been so long. Pulsatilla Wang must have already forgotten about me. He will only be at home hugging his southern sea girl. Hee hee. Besides, do I still have to be afraid of him now? Although Zhang Xiaohua was not too interested in the food and wine in front of him, he had not eaten for many years after all. Thus, he moved his chopsticks slightly and tasted every dish. The taste is not bad. This group of people actually didn't put poison in the food. After eating 2 more mouthfuls, Zhang Xiaohua felt bored. However, she knew that there was still a good show to be performed. She could not leave early. Sure enough, Bai Yonggui's eyes never left Zhang Xiaohua. From the moment Zhang Xiaohua entered the cabin to her interest in eating, he saw everything. Seeing that she stopped eating, he thought that she had not eaten hot food for a long time and was not used to it. When he was about to leave, he hurriedly said, "Fellow brothers, it was all thanks to Brother Ren that we were able to find the corpse of our senior brother in this vast sea. Everyone, let's toast to this little brother." Seeing everyone raise their cups, Zhang Xiaohua also smiled, raised her cup, and took a sip. Everyone drank it in one gulp and saw that Zhang Xiaohua was ignoring them. Bai Yonggui said again, "Brother Ren, you fished out my senior brother's corpse from the sea and buried him. I admire you very much. I'll take this opportunity to toast you on behalf of my senior brother." After speaking, he drank it in one gulp. Zhang Xiaohua nodded and still put the cup to her mouth. Bai Yonggui poured the wine and was about to speak again when Chai Feng spoke first, "That, Brother Ren, I'll also toast to you. The sea is vast, and there are still many days. If there is anything that I did not take care of you well, please forgive me." After speaking, he raised his cup and drank it. He's not a bad man. Zhang Xiaohua thought for a moment and raised his glass to taste it again. Bai Yonggui looked at Chai Feng with dissatisfaction and said to Zhang Xiaohua with a smile, "Brother Ren, if you are full, I have something to tell you." After hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua stood up and said with a smile, "Hero Bai and Hero Chai have already toasted me a few times. I'll also return the favor and toast to Hero Bai." After speaking, she floated up and exerted force on her feet. Her body shot out like an arrow, and in the blink of an eye, she was in front of Bai Yonggui. Before Bai Yonggui could react, she raised her cup and said, "Come, Hero Bai, please drink this cup." In an instant, everyone was shocked. Bai Yonggui was not the only one who was stunned. Looking at the wine cup that suddenly appeared in front of him and Zhang Xiaohua's smiling face, he had an indescribable feeling in his heart. The rest of the people were even more surprised. A few of them lost their composure and suddenly stood up, wanting to draw their swords from their waists. Chai Feng was surprised but reacted quickly. He immediately coughed and said, "That, senior brother Bai, cough cough, senior brother Bai." Bai Yonggui seemed to have woken up from a dream. He hurriedly stood up, and even the wine cup on the table almost spilled. Zhang Xiaohua's hand was as fast as lightning. She immediately held the wine cup and handed it to Bai Yonggui. She smiled and said, "Hero Bai, you don't have to be so polite. You can sit down." Bai Yonggui said awkwardly, There's no need. Since Brother Ren came to propose a toast, of course I have to stand up." Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "Hero Bai, you are too polite. Please." After speaking, she raised her cup to her lips and returned to her seat with a smile. Bai Yonggui looked at the wine cup in his hand. After thinking for a while, he raised his head and drank it. After that, the atmosphere in the cabin immediately became oppressive. The rest of the people looked at Bai Yonggui and Zhang Xiaohua with uncertain expressions. They didn't know what to do next. Zhang Xiaohua looked and asked, "Hero Bai, didn't you have something to tell me just now? May I ask what it is?" Bai Yonggui seemed to be infected. He also coughed twice and said, "It's nothing big. It's just that we still have a long time on land. If there's anything, just tell us. Little brother, you have lived alone on a deserted island for so many years. If there's anything you're not used to, just tell us. Please tell us. Zhang Xiaohua cupped her hands and thanked him, then I thank Hero Bai. I'm used to living alone on a deserted island. I can't adapt to a crowded place for a while. In the future, I won't come down to eat. Please take care of me. After speaking, she cupped her hands at everyone. At this time, everyone no longer had the playful expression from before. They all stood up and said that they didn't dare. Then, Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, I just got out of trouble. My body is really weak. I have to leave first. Please enjoy your meal. After speaking, she cupped her hands and left the cabin. In fact, when he came out, he wanted to say, Hero Bai, the road on the deserted island is uneven. I hope the road on the sea can be smooth. But after thinking about it, he felt that his lightness skill must have been enough to subdue this guy. So, he didn't intend to draw legs on a snake. Back in the cabin, Zhang Xiaohua didn't release his divine sense as before. He believed that if people weren't too stupid, they wouldn't have any ideas about him. Of course, if there was really someone who didn't know what to do, he wouldn't be lenient. Zhang Xiaohua sat cross-legged and cultivated for a moment. Then, he took out 2 primordial stones from his arms, one in each hand. Then, his right hand made a gesture and kept changing. He drew out the primordial chi from the primordial stones and hid it on the 4 walls of the cabin. He didn't stop until his forehead was sweating. This was the result of Zhang Xiaohua's cultivation of restriction and formation. He could barely set up some simple restriction to protect himself. After setting up the restriction, Zhang Xiaohua held the primordial stones in his hand and closed his eyes to cultivate. Chapter 309. Zhang Xiaohua, on the other hand, waved his hand coolly and left. Everyone in the cabin was left speechless. The fellow sufferers of Shinrong's sect looked at each other, not knowing what to say. That's right, in their eyes, this was just an ordinary boatman, an ant-like thing that they could crush with just a stretch of their hands. However, when they stretched out their hands, they suddenly realized that what was revealed in front of them was only a small toe, and what they saw was only a blurry leg. As for his entire strength, please, they didn't even have the time to see it clearly. At this time, Junior Brother Li opened his mouth and said, Senior Brother Bai, I see that this youth is only about 15 years old. Even if he is a disciple of a famous sect, he would start practicing Nigong at the age of 4 or 5. At most, it would take 10 years. Based on what Senior Brother said this afternoon, this guy was only taught by a fellow martial artist. Even if he is lying, he has only practiced Nigong for 5 or 6 years. I estimate that his strength is only in Qinggong. If we really fight, he will definitely not be our opponent. Another lean man also shouted, Yes, Senior Brother, he is only one person. We have more than 10 brothers. Why should we be afraid of him? Chai Feng curled his lips and said, Bullying the weak with the strong, bullying the weak with the many. Bai Yonggui frowned and said, Everything should be done in the sect. How can we worry about such small matters? Another person asked, That's right, Senior Brother Bai, can you confirm that this youth only knows Qinggong and doesn't know any other martial arts? Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua's words on the deserted island suddenly appeared in Bai Yonggui's mind, 2 heroes, be careful. There are a lot of stones on the ground. Don't be like me. You must pay attention to your feet. Don't sprain your ankle. When he said this, wasn't he going to sneak attack him from behind? Could it be? Could it be that he already knew? He purposely used the corpse to block my sword? In an instant, a layer of sweat appeared on Bai Yonggui's forehead. His heart felt weak and he felt cold. If that's the case, then isn't this youth very scary? Seeing that Bai Yonggui's expression was not right, the lean man said, Senior Brother Bai, what's wrong? Are you scared? You were just careless just now. If you were really facing an enemy, how could you let him get close to you? Bai Yonggui looked at everyone in the hall and rolled his eyes. He smiled and said, It's fine. Brothers, I was just careless just now. What Junior Brother you said makes sense. How about this, we'll hand this difficult task to Junior Brother Yu. He then rubbed his chin and said, Junior Marshal Brother Yu, if you can handle this matter well, I will definitely tell the truth in front of the sect leader and give you the greatest credit. What do you think? When the lean man heard this, he was overjoyed. He immediately stood up and said, Senior Bai, are you telling the truth? Bai Yonggue smiled and said, we're brothers, why would I lie to you? Junior Marshal Brother Yu said, well said. Since it's like this, I'll go and bring that guy's head over to accompany Senior Marshal Brother Bai's wine. As he spoke, he was about to leave his seat. At this time, a short and fat man beside him hurriedly tugged at his clothes and gave him a look. Junior Brother Yu was not an impulsive person. Seeing the junior brother who was close to him give him a hint, his heart trembled. He then looked at the other senior brothers and found that they all had an indifferent look on their faces. Some of them even had ridicule in their eyes. He immediately understood what was going on. He stopped walking and smiled apologetically, Senior Brother Bai, I think it's better to forget about it. This little brother came out this time only to help Senior Brother. You can eat the meat, but you can give this little brother some soup to drink. This merit should be decided by Senior Brother. This little brother will just wave the flag and shout from the side to support you. Bai Yonggue said unhappily, Junior Marshal Brother Yu's words are wrong. The sect leader has said that no matter if it's a white cat or a black cat, as long as it can catch mice, it's a good cat. It doesn't matter if you're a senior marshal brother or a junior marshal brother, as long as you can contribute to the sect, you're a good disciple. I'm only bringing you out. The reward will still depend on your performance. I won't block your path for myself. I think I'll leave this matter to you. Junior Marshal Brother Yu hurriedly said, Senior Marshal Brother Bai is too modest. I've always followed Senior Marshal Brother's lead. This time, I won't steal Senior Marshal Brother's glory. Right, if Senior Marshal Brother isn't willing to lower yourself to do it, I think Junior Marshal Brother Li should do it. He's already seen through this youth's strength and must have a card up his sleeve. When Junior Marshal Brother Li heard this, he was greatly angered and thought to himself, this bastard is really hateful. I was just casually flattering Senior Marshal Brother Bai. You're the one who stood up to take credit, but when you see that the wind is blowing in the wrong direction, you push it to me? Who doesn't know that the youth's Qinggong is powerful and that he can easily get close to us? If he has a long sword in his hand, his swings and thrusts will catch us off guard. Even Senior Marshal Brother Bai, with his high martial arts, fell for it, let alone us. If he really gets angry and wants to fight to the death, he'll definitely be able to drag a few of us down with him. This is still a situation where we're surrounded. If it's one-on-one, wouldn't the situation be even worse? Who would be stupid to be a bird that sticks its head out like this? Then, he immediately stood up and said, Senior Marshal Brother Yu, I'm only making a logical judgment. Senior Marshal Brother doesn't need to take it seriously. Just treat it as a fart. Moreover, Senior Marshal Brother Yu is my Senior Marshal Brother and Senior Marshal Brother Bai is my Senior Marshal Brother. If Senior Marshal Brother Yu isn't willing to steal Senior Marshal Brother Bai's credit, how could I dare to steal Senior Marshal Brother Yu's credit? In my opinion, it's better for Senior Marshal Brother Yu to go. How could Junior Marshal Brother Yu go? He had no choice but to brace himself and recommend a few more people. As for those who were recommended, they were angry that they were recommended and all of them were pushed back. In short, no one was willing to face Zhang Xiaohua's ghost-like Qinggong again. Bai Yonggue watched for a long time and secretly frowned. He coughed and said, Junior Marshal Brothers, to serve the faction leader, even if it's a mountain of swords and a sea of flames, you can't even frown. How can you shirk your responsibilities like this? Hearing this, all the Junior Marshal Brothers were overjoyed and said in unison, if that's the case, then Senior Marshal Brother Bai must personally take action. Bai Yonggui's face reddened and said, this is an important matter. It's better for us to discuss it again. We must have a foolproof plan before we can take action. What do you think, brothers? Everyone laughed and said, that's how it should be. Chai Feng also watched for a long time before he opened his mouth and said, Senior Marshal Brother Bai, Junior Marshal Brothers, although this matter is important, we still have a long journey ahead of us. There's no need to rush. It's already late, so everyone should rest early and discuss it again tomorrow. What do you think? Hearing this, everyone stood up and cupped their hands before returning to their cabins. After the sailors finished cleaning up, they served fragrant tea. The two of them took a sip before Chai Feng said, "Senior Marshal Brother Bai, it seems that we have a hot potato in our hands." Bai Yongui felt the same and nodded. "Junior Marshal Brother, did you also think of the words Ren Xiaoyao said on the deserted island?" "Yes, Senior Marshal Brother. Now that I think about it, there was a hidden meaning in those words. If it's really as we guessed, then this youngster's martial arts are far from what we can compare to. Perhaps only us junior martial brothers can take action together." "Junior Marshal Brother, are you not insisting on sending him to land and letting him leave safely?" Chai Feng said, "A gentleman's word cannot be taken back. Junior Marshal Brother is still willing to abide by the maxim and send him to land. However, Junior Marshal Brother isn't an inflexible person. If this youngster doesn't have the strength to truss up a chicken, then he must have no connection with Jianghu. If he returns to land, then he'll just mix in with the common people and probably won't leak any information about us. However, this youngster's martial arts are so strong that he might have some connection with some sect or sect. If he returns, then he might leak the information about the sheepskin scroll. I know that sect leader doesn't want the people of Jianghu to know that it was our Xian Rong sect that gained the benefits. Therefore, I feel that this youngster shouldn't be left alone." Bai Yongui smiled. "Then Junior Marshal Brother also agrees to silence him? Then let's properly discuss how we should act." Chai Feng shook his head and said, "Senior Marshal Brother Bai, it's not necessary to silence him to seal the information. This youngster only got involved by chance and doesn't know the details. Why don't we invite him to our sect and let him stay for a period of time? It won't be too late to let him out after the storm dies down. What do you think?" Bai Yongui shook his head and said, "Only the dead can keep secrets. This is what sect leader often teaches us. Junior Marshal Brother, how could you forget? Moreover, this guy's martial arts are so strong that he might be a spy from another sect. If we bring him back and there's a problem, wouldn't we be inviting a wolf into the house? I think Junior Marshal Brother's idea is too conservative." Chai Feng sneered. "Then Senior Marshal Brother Bai, what do you think we should do? This youngster's Qinggong is superb. Although I don't know how good his other martial arts are, just today's move alone shocked everyone present. The other junior martial brothers don't dare to face him alone. I think that even if we surround him, no one will dare to be the first to attack him." Bai Yongui was also helpless. He didn't want to be the first to attack, let alone the others. At this time, he suddenly said, "Junior Marshal Brother, why don't we secretly make a move while this guy is asleep? What do you think?" "Secretly make a move?" Chai Feng snorted and said, "Didn't you see how careful he was? He didn't even eat a few mouthfuls of the banquet. It was as if he was afraid of putting something in the dishes. He has lived on the sea for many years and has seen many things. Believe it or not, he definitely won't sleep peacefully tonight. Who knows, he might even be waiting for us to come." Thinking about Zhang Xiaohua's performance just now, Bai Yongui couldn't help but agree with Chai Feng's opinion. For the time being, he dismissed the idea of a night attack. Regarding Zhang Xiaohua, this youngster who he didn't know the depth of his martial arts, he didn't want to be in a hurry to shed all pretense of cordiality. Along the way, there was still plenty of time and opportunities. It was better to first stabilize this guy. Maybe an opportunity would appear and he would be able to dispose of him without shedding a drop of blood. Thus, the two chatted for a while before returning to their cabins to rest. Chapter 310. For the next few days, the elite disciples of the Xian Rong sect continued to stare at each other, unable to come up with any good ideas. After all, they had never practiced a siege formation. If they were to attack like a swarm of bees, no one could guarantee that they would be able to completely dodge the youth's outstanding Qinggong. Even if they had been taught to give up for the sake of everyone in the sect, who would be willing to give up their lives in front of a real situation. As for Zhang Xiaohua, it was just as Chai Feng had expected. He was really an experienced sea runner. Ever since he met everyone for the first time, he did not show his face again. All of his daily food needs were sent to the cabin by the sailors. Bai Yongui had invited him a few times, wanting to find out more about him, but he had been rejected with the excuse that he had just left the deserted island and was not feeling well. Even when the sailors delivered food, they only ate a little bit of staple food and drank a little bit of water. The rest of the meat and fish were not touched at all. This also destroyed the thoughts of some people who wanted to poison the food. In fact, Zhang Xiaohua had already abstained from eating, so it did not matter if he ate or not. However, if he really did not eat or drink in front of the people of the Xian Rong sect for a few days, then he might really be seen as a monster. They might even take advantage of his hunger and thirst to kill him. Wouldn't that disrupt his plan of hiding his strength? Zhang Xiaohua also really did not want to fall out with the people of the Xian Rong sect before they returned to land. The more Zhang Xiaohua acted like a hedgehog that no one could bite, the more Chai Feng felt that his judgment was correct. He was just an innocent sea runner. On the other hand, Bai Yongui was even more anxious. The supplies on the ship were limited, so he could not delay the ship from docking. Once the ship docked, he would have no reason to force the ship to stay. When that time came, they could only fight. Therefore, on this vast sea, on this ship, a very delicate balance was formed. However, the two sides of this balance were exceptionally passive and proactive. The reason why the Xian Rong sect was passive was because they could not come up with an effective method that would not harm themselves. On the other hand, they had two different voices. One was to silence the other, and the other was to send him to the sect. Although these two businesses were to prevent information from leaking out, the process and results of the implementation were completely different. The reason why Zhang Xiaohua took the initiative was that although he knew that the Xian Rong sect had evil intentions towards him, he only wanted to take the ship back to land. Just as Zhang Xiaohua thought, as long as I am careful and don't give you a chance, I don't believe that you will never reach land. And when you reach land, heh. Of course, the main reason why Zhang Xiaohua took the initiative was because of his powerful martial arts. The people of the Xian Rong sect had only seen his superb qinggong and did not know the depth of his martial arts. However, Zhang Xiaohua knew clearly that even if he used his qinggong to fight with them with a small sword in his hand, these people would definitely not be able to harm a single hair on his body. Not to mention, as long as he stayed in the cabin and used his divine sense to drive the small sword, he would be able to kill people like a ghost. Since the balance of power was in his hands, Zhang Xiaohua naturally led a carefree life. His cultivation was similar to when he was on the deserted island. However, in order to maintain an abundance of essential qi and deal with any unexpected situations, he temporarily stopped cultivating the blood of jade elixir core. When he cultivated at night, he placed restrictions all over his body to prevent himself from being ambushed when he was unconscious at midnight. In addition to comprehending the restrictions and formations, Zhang Xiaohua also took out a large amount of time to carefully read the first jade slip that Fire Dragon Jinren had left behind. This jade slip contained a lot of common knowledge about cultivation and a large amount of basic spells. When he was on the deserted island, Zhang Xiaohua was too lazy to waste time on these things. After all, it had nothing to do with cultivation. However, now that he was about to step into the pugilistic world, where martial arts reigned supreme, if he only had an unparalleled essential qi but did not know how to use it, wouldn't he be as stupid as a rich man who had a treasure house but did not know how to use it? After another 10 days, although he still did not see the shadow of land, he could often see the shadow of some ships in the distance. In his heart, Zhang Xiaohua knew that the land was not far away. This day, when it was close to noon, Zhang Xiaohua once again politely declined Bai Yonggui's invitation. He simply drank some water and ate some food. Then, he released his divine sense and covered the entire ship. In the cabin, seeing Bai Yonggui walking in, Junior Brother Li went forward and asked, "Senior Brother Bai, is that guy still not coming down?" "Yes, he seems to have sensed something. No matter what, he does not even take half a step out." Could it be that our actions have made him suspicious? Nonsense, what actions have we taken? We are just discussing countermeasures together. He does not have clairvoyance and clairvoyance, how could he know what we are doing? Senior Brother Bai is right. This guy is a cunning little fox, a coward. He immediately hid when he sensed the slightest movement and did not dare to come out again. He only ate so little. Even if we poisoned him, it would not work. How about we not send him water and food? What do you think? AI, do you think I don't want to? But even if we don't send him water, do you think he does not know where we put it? He does not step out of his room. How would he know? If I say you are stupid, then you are stupid. If you had such a high qigong, wouldn't you take advantage of the night to observe below the deck? This youth was born as a sea runner. In this aspect, he is more proficient than us. So, even if we don't send him food, won't he find it himself? So, after thinking about it, there are only two paths. Bai Yonggue said with a gloomy face. Two paths. Senior Brother Bai is truly brilliant. This lowly one is full of admiration. Even after racking my brains, I could not come up with even half an idea. Look at you, you're giving us two paths in one go. This lowly one is all ears. One of them flattered Bai Yonggue with a charming smile. Bai Yonggue was not in the mood to be flattered. He looked at the person angrily and said, if you can't think of anything, don't be anxious. As long as you follow my plan, you will also be a good disciple of our Xian Rong sect. The person shrunk his neck and felt that something was wrong. However, he still smiled apologetically and said, Senior Brother Bai, please tell me. Let's see if I have the ability. Bai Yonggue looked around at everyone and said, the first option is for us to surround his cabin and find two people to rush in through the door and window to attract his attention. Then, the others will rush in from these two places. Isn't this bastard's qigong powerful? Let's just stay in that cabin and make sure he doesn't have any space to move. I don't believe that we can't kill him. After he finished speaking, he pointed at the person who had just flattered him and said, you, go in through the door. If you can successfully kill him, I will give you the merit. When that person heard this, his expression changed. He smiled and said, Senior Brother Bai, you must be joking. This little brother's martial arts are low, so it's better for me to help from the back. It's better to give this important opportunity to someone else. Bai Yonggue laughed coldly. He looked at the people who did not dare to look him in the eyes. He said angrily, soldiers are trained for 1,000 days to be used in a single moment. Now is the time when the Xian Rong sect needs you. At this time, someone whispered, Senior Brother Bai, why don't you be the first to rush in? Bai Yonggue asked loudly, who said that? Seeing that no one responded, he said, of course I am willing to be the first to rush in. However, as the saying goes, an army cannot be without a general. I still have to stay in the middle to ensure the successful completion of this operation. This young man is just an insignificant ripple. There are more and more important things that I need to do. What about the second option? Someone asked. Bai Yonggue smiled and looked at the person, this second option is something that I have discussed with your senior brother Chai for a long time. It can be considered a foolproof plan. Everyone's eyes lit up. They were all very surprised. Our main purpose for going out to sea this time was to find this sheepskin scroll. Now that we have successfully completed our mission, I believe that the rewards from the sect will not be small. This young man who ran out to sea was just an accident. Preventing him from leaking information is a very professional job, and should be left to the experts. I think, should we send the news back to the sect and let the sect leader send a specialist to solve this problem? When everyone heard this, they all clapped and said, good, very good. Bai Yonggue seemed to have expected this result and said, since everyone has agreed, then let's take it as a collective decision made by the dozen of us. Junior Brother Li, I'll leave this matter to you. Time is ticking by and we should only be a few days away from Songluo City, right? Junior Brother Yu hurriedly replied, reporting to Senior Brother Bai, it is only 2 or 3 days away. Good, then tell the sailors to slow down the ship. If necessary, we can take a detour. But senior brother Bai, the supplies on our ship are not enough. If we encounter a storm, we may not be able to safely reach the shore. Bai Yonggui glared at him and said, no matter what, we have to hold on until we receive a reply from the sect. Otherwise, we may have made this trip in vain. Junior brother Li saw this and said, okay, senior brother Bai. I will immediately send a message to the sect. Bai Yonggui nodded, indicating that he should quickly go and do it. Not long after Junior Marshal Brother Li entered the deck, a bird that was a lot bigger than a pigeon but a bit smaller than a falcon flew out from a small window. That bird circled above the ship a few times, and after determining the direction, it flew in a certain direction. Junior brother Li watched with satisfaction as the bird flew away. Only then did he close the window and return to the cabin to report. However, just as he closed the window, a black light flew out from the cabin on the second floor. It flew like lightning towards the bird in the distance. Chapter 311. That black light was the small sword driven by Zhang Xiaohua. Although the bird flew very quickly, the small sword was even faster, and in a short while, it had caught up. The bird seemed to have sensed its pursuers and immediately increased its speed. As if it had been trained for a long time, it flew up, down, left and right as if it was trying to shake off the small sword. Unfortunately, the small sword had been through a battle with a wild seabird, and how could it be shaken off by this bird? In a short moment, the small sword was pressed against the bird's neck, and if it exerted a little more force, it would be stabbed to death. At this moment, the small sword suddenly shook off the bird, and with a turn, it flew back like a bolt of lightning. The bird had just escaped death and gave a loud cry. Once it had identified the direction, it flapped its wings and hurriedly escaped from this sad place. Zhang Xiaohua's divine sense had been enveloping the entire ship, and he had seen Bai Yonggui and the others discussing how to deal with him. However, he did not have clairvoyant ears and did not know what they were talking about. When he saw Junior brother Li going below the deck to write a note, he naturally paid close attention to it. Unfortunately, what he wrote was a mess, and even though he was used to reading ancient texts, he could not understand it. It was only when Junior brother Li released the bird that he felt that the note might be unfavorable to him, and without hesitation, he released his flying sword with the intention of intercepting the bird midway. But the moment he made his move, he hesitated. Who knew if what was written on the note was related to him? He was only playing the role of a young boy who was running on the sea. It was just that he happened to be on the deserted island at the right time. The skills he showed on the first day were enough to frighten them. Moreover, along the way, he didn't see them pick up their weapons and do anything to him. Was he being too careful? Furthermore, he did not understand the contents of the note. If this note was related to matters regarding the ship's docking and he had intercepted it, the Xian Rong clan would not be able to receive the information on the note, and if it delayed the ship's docking, wouldn't he be painting feet on a snake? Therefore, after weighing the pros and cons, Zhang Xiaohua decided to withdraw her flying sword and stay still. Junior brother Li didn't know that his actions of writing the note and releasing the birds had been seen clearly by others. Their birds, which they thought were very secretive, were almost intercepted by others. They even happily returned to the cabin and reported to Bai Yonggui. When everyone heard that the bird had flown out, they all felt as if a huge rock had been lifted off their shoulders. They laughed and chatted for a while, recalling the hardships they had gone through on this voyage and looking forward to the rewards they would receive when they returned. Only then did they all return to cultivate. Zhang Xiaohua watched as everyone laughed and chatted happily for a while before dispersing as usual. They didn't come up with any weapons. She couldn't help but feel puzzled. Could it be that she was thinking too much? The ship traveled on the sea for another 3 days. During this time, the ship's speed was sometimes fast and sometimes slow. Sometimes, it would even constantly change directions. Bai Yonggui was very nervous. He was afraid that Zhang Xiaohua would come out of the cabin and question him. Unfortunately, Zhang Xiaohua was not the youth that he claimed to be. This guy had no sense of direction. When he was at sea, he couldn't even tell north from south. How would he know that the ship was going in circles? Even if it was sometimes fast and sometimes slow, he would only think that it was normal. These days, because they had often encountered ships that signaled with flags, Zhang Xiaohua knew that they were getting closer and closer to the shore day by day. He became more and more cautious. Other than cultivating at night, his divine sense enveloped the entire ship. When he saw Bai Yonggui's anxious expression, he thought that he was waiting for orders from the sect. He was secretly glad that he didn't hunt down the bird that was sending the message. Sure enough, on this day, Zhang Xiaohua's divine sense moved, and the bird returned safely. After receiving Junior Marshal Brother Li's report, Bai Yonggui's face revealed a smile. Then, he called all his fellow disciples to the cabin for a meeting. Seeing this situation, Zhang Xiaohua didn't hesitate. Her body floated out of the window and along the outside wall of the ship, she slid down to the side of the cabin. She straightened her ears and listened attentively. The cabin where the disciples of Xian Rong sect discussed matters was in the middle of the deck. Usually, many sailors would pass by here. Zhang Xiaohua had the idea of eavesdropping before, but she gave up when she saw that it was easy to be discovered. Today, however, was different. First, the sailors were tired from the journey, so there weren't many people passing by. Zhang Xiaohua could monitor with her divine sense, so she could discover them in time and have time to hide. Second, Zhang Xiaohua wanted to know what was written on the note and whether it was related to her. Sure enough, when all the senior and junior brothers had gathered in the cabin, Bai Yonggui smiled and waved the slip of paper in his hand. Junior brothers, I just received a message from the sect today. The sect leader is very pleased that we were able to find the things we wanted. He has decided that when we return to the sect, he will reward us heavily. From the sect leader's words, this reward seems to be beyond our expectations. Moreover, the sect leader didn't complain that we brought someone back. He even followed our suggestion and... Just as he said this, Zhang Xiaohua's divine sense moved. Two sailors turned around from the back of the ship. Zhang Xiaohua quickly jumped up and disappeared from her window. She waited for the two sailors to pass by before she came back down. At this time, Bai Yonggui said, when the ship docks, we will cooperate with the two masters to take down this guy. The sect leader said that in order to ensure that nothing goes wrong, he specially invited a master with outstanding qinggong. There will definitely be no problem. Fellow junior martial brothers, when the time comes, we will just surround him. As for the rest, the two masters will take care of it. We just need to take the credit. Everyone said, Senior Martial Brother Bai's plan is good. Little brother admires it. Bai Yonggui waited for everyone to finish speaking before he said, Fellow junior martial brothers, we will soon arrive at Pingning Port. The sect leader instructed us to dock at an abandoned pier. The two masters will probably arrive on time. Everyone should go back for the time being. Have a good rest and recuperate your true qi. When the time comes, we will do our best for the foundation of the sect. Everyone stood up and said, it is our duty to dedicate ourselves to the cause of the sect. Only then did everyone go back. Bai Yonggui called out to Junior Martial Brother Yu and said, Junior Martial Brother Yu, inform the sailors that there is no need to take a detour or slow down. From now on, speed up to Pingning Port. Junior Martial Brother Yu complied and left. When there was no one in the cabin, Zhang Xiaohua sneered. Just as she was about to return to the cabin, she heard someone talking inside. She heard Chai Feng say worriedly, Senior Martial Brother Bai, did the sect leader say how to deal with this Ren Xiaoyao? Will we capture him and bring him back to the sect or kill him on the spot? Bai Yonggui sneered and said, Junior Martial Brother Chai, you should put away your conscience. Although you and I made a poison oath on the deserted island, the oath only said that we will safely send this guy to land. It didn't say what we will do when we arrive on land. Chai Feng was speechless. After a moment, he said, at that time, I didn't think too much about it. I just felt that this boy was innocent for getting involved in this muddy water. Innocent? There are many innocent people in this world. Since he came across Tan Wu's corpse, it means that this is heaven's will. If he doesn't take out Tan Wu's corpse, won't he not get involved? But if he doesn't dig out the corpse, will Senior Marshal Brother Bai let him on the ship? About that? Who knows? If that's the case, won't he end up the same way whether he hands over the corpse or not? Bai Yonggue seemed to tacitly agree with Chai Feng's words. He didn't refute them, but his voice was a little loud as he said, "Aren't I doing this for the sake of the Xianrong sect? If this news spreads to Jianghu, won't we end up like the Tan family? We chased Tan Wen and Tan Wu for several years, and they died in a foreign land. Don't tell me you want us to end up like them." Chai Feng immediately shook his head and said, "Senior Marshal Brother Bai, I don't have any other thoughts. I just feel that this boy is being treated unjustly. He has already delivered what we want, yet we still have to kill him." Bai Yonggue sneered again, "Put away your senseless pity. Do you know why the sect leader gave you a death order to listen to me this time? Isn't it because of your indecisiveness? If it weren't for you last time, we would have killed and captured Tan Wu on Yanming Mountain. How could we have let him escape overseas?" Chai Feng heaved a long sigh and didn't say anything else. Bai Yonggue didn't let him go and said, "Don't think that you can extricate yourself from this. Are you afraid of your own oath? Don't forget that when we were on the deserted island, you were the same as me. You also attacked that boy at the same time. If that boy kills you out of hatred, you won't be able to escape." Chai Feng said angrily, "Senior Marshal Brother Bai, isn't that because you used the sect leader's hint to force me?" After he finished speaking, he was about to rush out of the door. Bai Yonggue stepped forward and grabbed him. "Junior Marshal Brother Chai, listen to me. This Jianghu has always been a place of mutual deception. There is no mercy. With your character, if you weren't under the protection of the sect, you would have lost your life long ago. Do you know why we only benefited from the Tan family's matter?" When Chai Feng heard this, he couldn't help but become curious and said, "I know my character's shortcomings. I'm very trusting, indecisive, and don't like to hurt people. I'm not cut out for the Jianghu. However, we grew up in the sect. If we don't mingle in the Jianghu, how can we make a living? And what is the relationship between my character and the Tan family?" Zhang Xiaohua's gossipy heart was also greatly aroused. Just as he was about to listen carefully, another sailor passed by. He had no choice but to return to the cabin and wait for the sailor to pass before coming down. Although Zhang Xiaohua secretly cursed this guy for interrupting his story, he also knew that the number of sailors had decreased because they were about to reach the shore. If it was before, he wouldn't have been able to stay outside the window for even a moment. Sure enough, Bai Yonggue, who was in the cabin, had already started talking. "I also happened to find out from a senior marshal brother who was in charge of intelligence that our Xianrong sect had already noticed the Tan family's strange movements 5 or 6 years ago. We had already begun to make arrangements and gather relevant information. However, the Tan family was a large martial family. Outsiders rarely entered, so it was extremely difficult to find out any information. Only one of the senior marshal brother's disciples, who disguised himself as a jade shopkeeper, was able to establish a little bit of contact with a young master of the Tan family who liked jade." Chapter 312. Chai Feng didn't understand and asked, "What does this have to do with my personality?" Bai Yonggue ignored him and continued, "This Tan family's third young master became familiar with our shopkeeper after a while, and our shopkeeper happened to have a cousin who was as beautiful as a flower and jade. Tell me, how could this Tan family's third young master not fall into the trap? Although this Tan family's third young master didn't like women, the temptation of having a close female friend was always there. People don't always say that it's enough to have a close friend. If it's a close female friend, it's even rarer. This Tan family's third young master also thought that his luck was against heaven's will to meet a close friend who could talk to him. He gradually became defensive and in the end, he told him everything he knew. He almost told him that he wet his bed when he was 3 years old. Unfortunately, this third young master Tan is a good-for-nothing disciple of the family. Above him are the eldest young master and second young master, both of whom are elites of their time. However, even though the information he provided was limited, it still allowed the gang leader to obtain a lot of useful information. Let's not talk about the Tan family obtaining the sheepskin scroll. The gang leader had no choice but to report it. However, no one would have thought that the sheepskin scroll was hidden in Tan Wen and Tan Wu's bodies. These two are only side branches of the Tan family. When the Tan family was exterminated, they were lucky enough to escape the calamity. When everyone else thought that the sheepskin scroll was destroyed in the Sea of Fire and became a mystery, only our gang leader knew in his heart. What does this mean? It means that in Jianghu, where the weak are prey to the strong, there is no trust that can be trusted. Even if you think of a close friend, he may betray you for some benefit, or even deliberately approach you. That Tan family's third young master still doesn't know that he's just a backup plan left behind by the gang leader. He still thinks that he got the help of his close female friend and escaped the disaster. Chai Feng smiled bitterly and said, "Maybe it's better not to know. He lives in a world arranged by others, maybe it's better for him to live." "Then what about you? Junior Chai, you still have to muddle along in Jianghu." Bai Yonggue said sarcastically. Chai Feng squeezed out a smile and said, "I know Senior Bai is doing this for my own good, but a leopard can't change its spots. Maybe it's like this in this life. Many thanks for Senior Apprentice Brother's guidance. I also need to take a rest. The ship is about to reach the shore." With that, he cupped his fists and left the cabin. Bai Yonggue waited for him to walk to the door before saying, "The decision to kill or capture that young man alive is not in our hands. We'll wait until we reach the shore and see what the two masters decide." When Chai Feng heard this, he shrugged his shoulders and did not say anything. He continued to walk out without stopping. Zhang Xiaohua saw that the song had ended and the crowd had dispersed, so he also slipped back into the cabin. At first, he hated Bai Yonggue to the bone and was prepared to find an opportunity to kill him when they reached the shore. However, after hearing Bai Yonggue's heartfelt words to Chai Feng, his heart was moved. From their point of view, killing me to silence me may be the best way. If I spread the news that they have obtained the sheepskin scroll, their Xian Rong faction will probably end up like the Tan family. Zhang Xiaohua muttered to himself, but, his heart moved, could it be, I am also an indecisive person? I am also not suited to dawdling in Jianghu? Zhang Xiaohua took out a small sword from his bosom. The small sword flew a few times in the air before flying straight out the window and into the clouds. Zhang Xiaohua's mouth revealed a smile as he muttered to himself, perhaps. This night was destined to be a peaceful night. Not only was the sea calm and the moon bright, but the entire ship was also incomparably quiet under Zhang Xiaohua's divine sense. The sailors were busy with their own things. The disciples of the Xian Rong faction were also sitting cross-legged in meditation. Only a few idle old sailors were leaning against the ship's railing and humming an unknown nostalgic song. Zhang Xiaohua knew that tonight would be his last night at sea. Although it seemed that Bai Yonggue and the others would definitely not do anything to him tonight, he did not dare to be careless. He still carefully set up an exquisite restriction around himself before closing his eyes to cultivate in peace. After these days of practice, the inhibition was placed smoothly and almost smoothly. To be honest, Zhang Xiaohua had already learned these inhibition when he was on the deserted island. He had also casually used them in the cave. It was easy to use then and was not as strenuous as now. Therefore, he thought that he had learned them very well. However, when he was in a strange cabin and tried to use them, he found that it was not the case. Perhaps in the cave, the primordial qi was more abundant, so it was easier to set up the inhibition. The primordial qi on the sea is much thinner. It is somewhat strenuous to rely only on the primordial qi in the meridians. The primordial qi drawn from the primordial stone is not as smooth as the primordial qi of heaven and earth. As the saying goes, practice is the only standard to test the truth. It really makes sense. Fortunately, I have been comprehending the inhibition, so I can successfully set up the inhibition under difficult conditions. Moreover, the training under these difficult conditions has also allowed me to have a deeper understanding of the inhibition. One's sweat, one's harvest. The ancients did not lie. Before falling asleep, Zhang Xiaohua was quite gratified. With Bai Yonggui's instructions, the ship went directly to the shore. When the sky was bright, the shadow of the coastline could already be seen in the distance. Of course, it was only a shadow. In Zhang Xiaohua's cognition, this shadow represented hope. This shadow meant that he was one step closer to his family. Of course, Zhang Xiaohua, who already had sailing experience, also knew that although the coastline looked very close, it was hard to say how long it would take to reach the shore. Perhaps Zhang Xiaohua was the only one who was eager to return home. In his divine sense, the people of the Xian Rong faction were meditating with their eyes closed. They were accumulating their primordial qi. They probably knew that once the ship reached the shore, there would be a fierce battle. A fierce battle that they were not confident of protecting themselves. Although their opponent was only a very ordinary-looking youth, who knew who this youth would pull down as a scapegoat when he fought like a cornered beast? Zhang Xiaohua looked at their serious expressions and suddenly felt a trace of amusement in his heart. There was also a trace of a feeling of looking down on them. His heart moved. Could it be that this was the feeling of being in a high position? Yes, this is the feeling of having a card up one's sleeve. Everything is under control. Or rather, it's a feeling of transcendence. Everything has nothing to do with me. Although they are afraid of me and think of ways to control me, what about me? I see these as insignificant tricks. I see the dangerous road as a smooth road. Even the experts they invited are not in my eyes. This feeling of being in the situation but floating outside is really strange. After thinking about it, Zhang Xiaohua understood. He did not practice the Big Dipper magical fist. He did not remove the restriction around him and closed his eyes to meditate. He had already realized that this kind of state of mind was more valuable than the Heart Sutra. The Heart Sutra could be done step by step and progress step by step, but the state of mind came too randomly. Fortunately, seeing that they were about to reach the shore, the people of the Xian Rong sect also wanted to pass the last part of the journey peacefully. No one came to disturb Zhang Xiaohua. Even the sailor who delivered the food, after knocking on the cabin door for a long time, did not see anyone open it. He only placed the food at the door and ignored them. He must have received instructions from someone else. However, when evening came and the port was already in sight, Zhang Xiaohua's cabin door still did not open. Only then did the sailor panic and report it to Junior Marshal Brotherly. Junior Marshal Brotherly was also puzzled. Although Zhang Xiaohua's cabin door was usually closed, the food was always taken in. Could it be that something had happened when they were about to reach the shore? Naturally, he did not dare to be negligent and quickly went to find Bai Yonggui to discuss it. On the way back to the shore, Zhang Xiaohua was a thorn in their hearts. They could not touch him. It was not easy to get the faction leader to send experts to deal with him. If he disappeared, they would not be able to hand him over. Thus, they might end up with a bad ending. Bai Yonggui was more attentive. Bai Yonggui was more attentive. After hearing the report, he wasn't in a hurry to see what was going on. He first asked the sailors about the situation last night. After knowing that there weren't any ships that passed by, he was relieved. He smiled and said to everyone, since there weren't any ships that passed by last night, then this young man must still be in the cabin. He used to hide in the cabin, so he must have seen that we're going to dock today. He's not a fool, so he naturally knows that there won't be any good results when we dock. So he hid in the cabin and thought of a countermeasure. As long as we guard carefully and don't let him escape, it will be a great merit. Junior Brotherly said uneasily, but, Senior Brother Bai, if he really is not in the cabin and we can't hand him over when we reach the shore, what should we do? Haha, that's easy. Junior Brotherly, I will give you a task. Go to the cabin and ask that little brother to come out. How about it? Ah, me? Oh, I also agree with Senior Brother Bai's opinion. The sea is vast and there are no ships passing by. No matter how good his qigong is, he can't be in the water and not sink. He must still be in the cabin scratching his head. Everyone chuckled, thinking the same thing. Bai Yonggui waved his hand and asked the sailor to come forward. He said, "Go to the cabin door and watch carefully." "That's right, find another person to go to the deck and watch the window. If there are any changes, quickly report to me." This? The sailor saw that the others did not dare to go, so he was also timid. "It doesn't matter. He will not make things difficult for people like you. There is no harm in going." Chai Feng sighed and said. The sailor looked at him nervously and did not dare to say anything. He carefully walked away. Bai Yonggui waved his hand and said, "Everyone, we are about to reach the shore. Everyone, according to the positions we discussed before, take your positions. Before the ship reaches the shore, we still have to stand on guard. Once the ship reaches the shore, hee." When everyone heard this, their expressions turned cold. They did not dare to be careless. They quickly took their swords and went out according to the previous agreement. The port was getting closer and closer. Dusk was also approaching. Under the dusk, the deserted port looked incomparably bleak. Today, however, was different. There were already a few people standing on the shore, looking up. Chapter 313. This pier used to be a good harbor. Large and medium-sized ships could directly dock at the shore. It used to be very lively, but in recent years, it had become deserted, which was very strange. However, businessmen valued profits. Since Pingning Port could also provide a good channel, who would care about the reason why this pier was deserted? The ship slowly approached the shore, but Zhang Xiaohua's cabin door still did not open. Bai Yonggui was half happy and half worried. He was happy that the ship had finally reached the shore. Seeing that the sect leader on the shore had sent reinforcements, he could finally hand over this hot potato. He was worried that the youth with excellent qigong still hadn't come out. Could it be that as junior brotherly guest, he had sneaked away last night? However, if he had to open Zhang Xiaohua's cabin door himself, he really didn't have the courage. Looking at the four people on the shore, Bai Yonggui couldn't help but secretly wipe the cold sweat on his forehead. After thinking for a while, he called everyone and jumped onto the shore. There were four people standing side by side on the shore. Two of them were around 23 or 24 years old. They were wearing gray robes and hats. One of them was holding a long sword, and the other was holding a long crescent moon shovel. The two people standing on both sides were dressed in martial attire. They were about 40 years old, and all of them were holding long swords. Although the two people were old, they seemed to be very respectful to the two people in the middle. They lowered their heads and said something. Of the two people in the middle, one closed the door and didn't say anything. The other one replied occasionally. They weren't arrogant, but they were extremely indifferent. Bai Yonggui led everyone to the shore. He first saluted the two young people in the middle and said, "Greetings, masters." One of them nodded, and the other still closed his eyes and ignored him. Then, Bai Yonggui saluted the two men in martial attire and said, "Li Li, Deacon Chen, you came in person." The dark and fat man laughed and said, "Little Bai, don't call me Hall Master. It's better to call me Vice Hall Master Li." Bai Yonggui smiled and said, "Li Li is a good name. If this trip goes smoothly, I think Li Li will definitely go one step further. I'm not wrong to call you that." "Good, Xiao Bai. I like what you're saying. Your contribution this time is not small. I won't forget it. Also, the people behind you will all be heavily rewarded." Hearing this, everyone was overjoyed and cupped their fists to express their thanks. Bai Yonggui took a step forward and was about to say something when he saw Li Li give him a look and asked, "Xiao Bai, where is the expert you mentioned? How come I only see you guys and not that person?" This. Bai Yonggui didn't know what to say. Seeing Bai Yonggui hesitate, Li frowned and said, "Did he escape?" Bai Yonggui hurriedly explained, "Mr. Li, it's a misunderstanding. We're keeping a close eye on him. Why would we give him a chance? That's strange. Where is he? This. Bai Yongui pondered for a moment before taking a step forward. At this moment, the young man said impatiently, "If you have something to say, say it out loud. Why are you whispering?" Li Li also scolded, "Xiao Bai, if you have something to say, just say it. Our Xian Rong sect has nothing to hide." Bai Yongui said awkwardly, "Mr. Li, that young man didn't escape. He's just hiding in the cabin and won't come out. We don't dare to call him." Hearing this, Mr. Li's heart was as clear as a mirror. He scolded, "You bunch of useless things. If you don't even have the guts, how can you still survive in Jianghu?" However, he looked at the two young men. Seeing this, the young man seemed to understand something. He smiled and said, "Well said, Mr. Li, since your leader invited us here, let us do this." Hearing this, Mr. Li put on a smile and said, "That's good. Then we'll have to ask the Grandmaster to do it." At this moment, someone suddenly said, "Grandmaster? Where are you Grandmasters from?" When everyone looked back, they saw an ordinary young man standing on the high bow of the ship. Seeing this, Bai Yongui hurriedly said, "Mr. Li, Grandmasters, it's this young man." After saying this, he waved to the others. The others all jumped back and surrounded the dock in a semicircle. Seeing the reaction of Bai Yongui and the others, Mr. Li smiled and thought, "Not bad, children can be taught." Then, Mr. Li took a step forward and cupped his fists to Zhang Xiaohua. "Little brother, I am Xian Rong Sect's Luo River Hall's Vice Hall Master Li Min. Under the order of our leader, I invite you to our sect for a while." He didn't mention Zhang Xiaohua's alias at all. It was as if he was sure that Ren Xiaoyao wasn't his name. How could Zhang Xiaohua believe him? He said in a clear voice, "Vice Hall Master Li, many thanks for your sect leader's kind intentions. However, this one has been overseas for a long time. It would be better for me to stay here for a year and a half. When I have time, I will pay a visit to your sect leader. Then," he added, "I'll remember your sect's kindness in bringing me back from the deserted island. I won't tell anyone." Zhang Xiaohua thought that the two masters invited by the Xian Rong sect were elders with strong martial arts. Only now did she know that the masters were two monks. The hats on their heads were obviously to cover their bald heads. He knew that the Xian Rong sect wouldn't want the sheepskin scroll to spread, so he didn't leak anything when he spoke. His words clearly told Mr. Li that he wouldn't reveal anything about the sheepskin scroll. Although Hall Master Li understood the meaning behind his words, he had received a death order. How could he dare to show any mercy to his subordinates? He could only smile and say, "Little brother, you're thinking too much. Our sect leader likes young talents the most. He was very happy when he received the news and sent me to welcome you. If you don't go, wouldn't you be letting down our sect leader's painstaking efforts?" Zhang Xiaohua laughed coldly and was about to speak. The thinner monk next to him said, "This benefactor, you should listen to Vice Hall Master Li. If you let this little monk fight, it won't be good. It won't be good if you get injured." Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "If I go with you, what will you say? Will I just leave like this?" Ahem, Mr. Li laughed dryly and said, In order to show little brother's sincerity, I'll have to ask this great master to seal little brother's acupoints. Of course, it's only a few simple acupoints and won't have any effect on the body. When we arrive at the sect, we'll immediately undo little brother's acupoints. Our sect leader is also waiting to apologize to little brother and hold a welcoming banquet." Ha ha ha, Zhang Xiaohua laughed loudly, as if she had heard the funniest thing in the world. The monk next to him frowned and said, "Vice Hall Master Li, why are you wasting time with him? Just directly take him down. Try peaceful means before resorting to force, try peaceful means before resorting to force," Mr. Li explained. After Zhang Xiaohua finished laughing, she was about to speak when she heard a clamor from the side. Zhang Xiaohua looked up and saw that it was a crow on a huge weeping willow on the shore. Even with so many people, the crow didn't fly away. It was a strange thing. Zhang Xiaohua rolled her eyes and said loudly, "Where did this crow come from? It's so noisy, it's really unpleasant to hear." After she finished speaking, she stood up and held a long sword in her hand. From the high ship, she directly flew towards the weeping willow. Seeing this, the skinny monk's eyes lit up and praised, "Good Qinggong." At this time, the monk who had his eyes closed also opened his eyes. His eyes flashed for a moment before he closed them again. The huge weeping willow was outside the encirclement of the Xian Rong sect people. When Bai Yonggue saw Zhang Xiaohua jump out, he led everyone to follow Zhang Xiaohua's figure and flew outside. When Zhang Xiaohua landed, she was right next to the weeping willow, but she was still surrounded by people. Seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua wasn't nervous. Her right hand exerted force and stabbed her long sword into the ground. She looked at Mr. Li and smiled, "This crow is very noisy and always says some nonsense. Watch how I deal with it." After she finished speaking, she walked to the side of the weeping willow. She bent down and wrapped her arms around the thick trunk. The trunk was very big and Zhang Xiaohua couldn't even wrap her arms around half of it. However, Zhang Xiaohua didn't mind. She took a deep breath and shouted, "Rise!" Then, he exerted a little strength with his arms, and the ground shook. The huge weeping willow was pulled up a few inches. The weeping willow was huge, and its crown was the size of a few houses. The roots under the tree were even denser, almost covering the entire dock. Zhang Xiaohua exerted his strength, and it was tantamount to causing a small earthquake in the dock. Zhang Xiaohua originally wanted to pull out the entire weeping willow. However, after pulling out a few inches, she found that the roots were too big. Although she was strong, she couldn't pull it out completely. Thus, she changed her mind and pushed. The weeping willow fell crookedly to the ground. The nest on the tree fell to the ground and the crow naturally flew away. After pushing down the weeping willow, Zhang Xiaohua clapped her hands and said, "With this, the world is finally peaceful." Seeing this scene, the dozen people from the Xian Rong sect who surrounded her were all dumbfounded. Their eyeballs almost fell to the ground. As for the 4 people outside the encirclement, the 2 leaders were dumbfounded as they looked at the huge tree that had fallen to the ground in disbelief. The monk who had his eyes closed also opened his eyes. His eyes were burning with passion. Only the skinny monk was surprised and had a hint of regret. "I thought that this young man was going to use his Qinggong to kill the crows. I didn't expect him to be so crude. Although his strength is ridiculously great, if I had known he would be like this, I would have taken the opportunity to go up and seal his acupoints." His idea was reasonable, but how could Zhang Xiaohua not have thought of it? This was also the reason why he pushed down the weeping willow when he saw that he couldn't pull it out. In this short period of time, with Zhang Xiaohua's ethereal steps and with the help of her divine sense, how could she be afraid of a sneak attack? Seeing that the wharf was silent, Zhang Xiaohua was very satisfied. She smiled and said, "The crow is gone. Everyone has calmed down. Can I go now?" Li managed to fix his dislocated jaw with difficulty. He stuttered, this, master." He didn't know the martial arts of this ordinary young man, but the strength of his arms had long exceeded his imagination. In a moment, he could only ask the monk beside him for help. Chapter 314. Before the thin monk could speak, the monk with his eyes closed stepped forward with the crescent moon spade in his hand and shouted, "Benefactor, you are quite strong. Let me have a taste of your strength." Zhang Xiaohua was furious when he saw this. Along the way, he had first dodged Bai Yonggue and Chai Feng's sneak attacks on the deserted island. Then, he had used his lightness skill to intimidate the people of the Xian Rong sect. He had even hidden in the cabin and refused to see them. Just now, he had used his strength to pull out the weeping willow. He had endured it again and again and continuously intimidated them. He wanted to tell them that he was not afraid of them. He just did not want to cause trouble and wanted to go home quietly. But what about the people of Xian Rong sect? Since they failed to silence him, they asked for help. They even let him seal their acupoints and go with them. It was obvious that they wanted to kill him. The people of the Xian Rong sect were shocked when they saw how much effort he put in to topple the tree. Now, this monk was standing up for them. It seemed like they wouldn't give up until they hit a wall. If he didn't teach them a lesson, they wouldn't know that Lord Ma had 3 eyes. Zhang Xiaohua watched the monk walk into the encirclement and sneered, "Since you want to fight, let's fight. First, introduce yourself." The monk held the crescent moon spade and said proudly, "This monk is from the Dalan Temple, Yuan Shan." Dalan Temple? Zhang Xiaohua frowned. He did not know much about Jianghu. When he heard the monk, the first thing he thought of was the Dalan Temple. However, isn't the Dalan Temple a famous sect in Jianghu? Why is it involved with the Xian Rong sect? Killing people and robbing them of their treasures is obviously despised by Jianghu. Why is the Dalan Temple involved? However, Zhang Xiaohua was furious. He did not care whether he was from the Dalan Temple or the Shaolin Temple. When Yuan Shan came over with the crescent moon spade, he laughed and said, "Good, good, good." After that, he pulled out the long sword that was stuck in the ground beside him and leaped forward. He raised his sword and slashed downwards. He shouted, "Monk Yuna, eat my sword." Zhang Xiaohua had only learned the nameless swordsmanship. If he used a sword that weighed thousands of kilograms, he would be able to lift it as if it was light, but it would lose its lightness. Zhang Xiaohua had not learned any other swordsmanship. However, since the pulsatilla could use a soft sword to chop, why couldn't he use a long sword? Of course, this move of his was very similar to the mountain-splitting strike. Monk Yuan Shan saw that Zhang Xiaohua's sword was coming at him and his body was full of openings. He originally wanted to use the crescent moon shovel to greet the openings on his body, but when he heard the sound of the sword whistling through the air, he knew that even if he succeeded in one move, when the sword reached his body, his brain would inevitably burst open. His heart could not help but tremble. With a loud shout, he actually raised the crescent moon shovel with both hands and welcomed Zhang Xiaohua's sword. In Yuan Shan's mind, his crescent moon spade, which was as thick as a duck's egg, was naturally at an advantage. He estimated that the long sword would be retracted before it reached his head. However, at that moment, the long sword and the crescent moon spade collided. At first, when Yuan Shan saw that Zhang Xiaohua did not retract his move, he was secretly delighted. Although the long sword was still a sword embryo and had not been sharpened, how could it be compared with his crescent moon spade? Wouldn't it be knocked away by him? However, in an instant, an extremely abundant and huge force that he had never encountered before came from the crescent moon spade in his hand. It was as if a huge mountain was pressing down on him. Yuan Shan's eyes widened and his face turned ashen. He clenched his teeth and used all the strength in his body to resist. In everyone's ears, they heard a loud crack sound. Yuan Shan was actually half a head shorter and his whole calf sank into the ground. Then, with a puff sound, Yuan Shi spat out a mouthful of blood and shouted, "Good." The strength in his hand weakened by half. Then, with another puff sound, he spat out another mouthful of blood and said, "Good." The crescent moon spade became a little shorter again. Yuan Shi's arm trembled slightly. Then, with another puff sound, he spat out another mouthful of blood and said, "Good." The crescent moon spade also fell to the ground with a clang sound. Yuan Shi spat out 3 mouthfuls of blood and his body collapsed. Unfortunately, his whole calf had sunk into the ground and he could not fall down even if he wanted to. Zhang Xiaohua's long sword fell on the top of Yuan Shan's head. When the thin monk not far away saw this, he was shocked and shouted, "Don't take my senior brother's life." Before he finished speaking, the monk had already stabbed the long sword in his hand towards Zhang Xiaohua's glabella. His lightness skill was like an arrow leaving the bowstring. Even Zhang Xiaohua was shocked when she saw it. Unfortunately, with Zhang Xiaohua's divine sense, she had already seen the long sword's momentum. When the long sword reached her body, she slightly tilted her head and dodged. The long sword missed. The thin monk was also outstanding. When he saw the long sword miss, he first used a sword flower to protect his body. Then, he flipped in the air and faced Zhang Xiaohua, continuing to stab. Zhang Xiaohua had no intention of harming Monk Yuanshi's life. The long sword in his hand only touched Monk Yuanshan's head. Soon after, he did a somersault and floated high into the air, dodging the long sword once again. He casually threw his long sword at Chai Feng, who was surrounding him. When Chai Feng saw the long sword flying towards him while the two of them were in a heated battle, he was already scared witless. He bent over, and the long sword flew past his head, stabbing into the ground behind him. After throwing the long sword away, Zhang Xiaohua took out a small sword from her bosom. "Hey, hey!" She laughed coldly and flew towards the thin monk. When the thin monk saw Zhang Xiaohua throw the long sword away, he was puzzled at first. But when he saw Zhang Xiaohua take out a toy small sword from her bosom, he did not know what she meant. But he did not dare to be careless. He pointed his long sword and attacked again. When Zhang Xiaohua saw the long sword coming, she did not retreat but advanced. She dodged, her body strangely dodged half an inch, avoiding the tip of the sword. The small sword in her hand also quickly stabbed towards the thin monk's throat. The monk was shocked. He moved his body sideways and kicked towards Zhang Xiaohua's waist. Zhang Xiaohua was in the air, she also bent her leg and kicked. With a muffled sound, the two people kicked together. The thin monk used the momentum to stand up, but Zhang Xiaohua was like a wisp of smoke, flying towards the encirclement. The thin monk thought she was going to escape, so he shouted, "Don't go." He chased after her again, but Zhang Xiaohua used the momentum to fly. How fast was she? When he chased after her, Zhang Xiaohua had already swept into the encirclement. But Zhang Xiaohua did not fly over the encirclement as the thin monk thought. Instead, she stuck out the small sword in her hand and directly stabbed towards one of the people in the encirclement. It was none other than Bai Yonggui. Like Chai Feng, Bai Yonggui was scared witless by Zhang Xiaohua's bravery. He hurriedly raised his sword to meet the attack. His martial arts were not as good as Zhang Xiaohua's, so he had already lost his sense of propriety. Zhang Xiaohua sneered. The small sword touched his throat and a trace of blood had already seeped out. Then, she stopped exerting force and turned her hand back. The small sword swept past Bai Yonggui's right hand that was holding the sword and cut off his thumb. The 10 fingers were connected to the heart. Bai Yonggui felt a piercing pain and his long sword fell to the ground with a clang. At this moment, the thin monk had also rushed over. Zhang Xiaohua turned her head and grinned. She did not break out of the encirclement. Instead, she turned around and flashed past. She stretched out her small sword again and stabbed towards the thin monk's throat from a strange angle. The thin monk did not dare to be negligent. He changed the move of the long sword in his hand and protected the front of his body. However, Zhang Xiaohua suddenly rose up in the air and swept over his head. Then, she casually stabbed back with her long sword, leaving a trace of blood on the back of the thin monk's neck. Before the skinny monk could turn around, he felt a chill at the back of his neck. He knew that something was wrong and stabbed his sword back, wanting to perish together. However, Zhang Xiaohua had already flown back into the encirclement. She no longer looked at the crowd and laughed. "Don't bother me again. Otherwise, I won't be as relaxed as I am today." After she finished speaking, she flew in the direction of Chai Feng. Chai Feng had just gotten up when he saw Zhang Xiaohua flying towards him. He couldn't help but lie down again. Zhang Xiaohua ignored him and flew straight to her sword. She pulled out her sword and floated up again. With a few leaps, she disappeared into the dusky wilderness. From the moment Zhang Xiaohua made her move to flying out of the encirclement, only a short time had passed. The two leaders of the Xian Rong sect outside the encirclement did not have time to make their move. At this moment, they also quickly flew over and wanted to chase after her. However, they did not dare and looked hesitant. The skinny monk stood there with a pale face. He stared blankly at his hand. There was only a faint trace of blood in his palm. After a while, he regained his senses. He looked at Li Li, who was standing in the middle of the encirclement and did not move even half a step forward. He said with great frustration, "Don't chase after him. You are not his match. Moreover, you can't catch up to him." Li Li immediately said, "Yes, great master." The skinny monk said again, "Let's go and check on my senior brother's injuries." In fact, he already knew that this young man did not have any killing intent. He had just reincarnated under his sword. Presumably, his senior brother's life was not in danger. Sure enough, Monk Yuan Shan's internal organs were severely shaken and his whole body was weak. After taking the Dalan Temple's secret elixir, he woke up after half an incense stick's worth of time. Zhang Xiaohua had already gone far away. The people of the Xian Rong sect did not need to surround her. Now, they were all standing at the side in a daze. Thinking that they had actually been on the same ship as such a great expert for so many days, they could not help but feel a lingering fear. However, they were also quite glad that their decision was correct and did not provoke him. Otherwise, they did not know where their lives would have been lost. When Chai Feng saw Bai Yonggui's injuries, his heart was in turmoil. He knew that the seemingly ordinary young man did not have any intention to hurt him. The sword that was thrown at him was only a warning. As for Bai Yonggui, he had sneak attacked him on the deserted island and wanted to kill him on the ship. Although he was not killed by him, the thumb on his right hand was cut off by the young man. He would never be able to use a sword again. Fortunately, this young man seemed to remember the benefits of bringing him back to land and spared his life. Only then could Bai Yonggui struggle at death's door and end his life. The skinny monk originally wanted to ask about Zhang Xiaohua's situation in detail. However, when he saw Monk Yuan Shan's dispirited and listless appearance, he said, "Senior brother's injuries are serious. I have to bring him back to the temple for treatment. You guys deal with the aftermath here. When I return to the temple, I will report this matter to the elders. You guys should also hurry back to the temple." After he finished speaking, he did not stay any longer. He carried Monk Yuanshi on his back and used his qinggong to immediately leave. Chapter 315. The skinny monk didn't reveal his name from the beginning to the end. Hall Master Li's expression was uncertain as he watched the figure gradually disappear into the distance. He had originally thought that it would be a good job, but all he had to do was capture a young man of unknown origin. With the help of 2 monks from the Yuan generation of the Dalan Temple, wouldn't it be a piece of cake? But reality played a joke on him. This was not an easy job, it was a job that took their lives. Looking at the situation, if it wasn't for the fact that the other party didn't want to kill them, none of them would have been able to survive. How am I going to explain this to the sect? Li regretted messing up the job. He wanted to use this job to win the faction leader's favor. But then, he smiled. Since he couldn't even capture the senior monks from the Dalan Temple, one of them almost lost his life, how could the faction leader blame him? After thinking, he called Bai Yonggui, who had just finished bandaging his wound, over and asked gently, "Little Bai, how are your injuries?" Bai Yonggui bared his teeth and said, "Thank you for your concern, Li Li. This guy is too sinister. He actually chopped off my right thumb. But I've already found it. When I go back and find the faction's doctor, he should be able to reattach it." Li frowned and said with a smile, "It's okay, little Bai. As long as you don't lose your life, everything is fine. Don't worry. Even if your thumb can't be reattached, I will find you a stable position in the hall." Bai Yonggui was moved to tears. He clasped his hands and said, "Li Li treats me like this. How can I not serve you?" Li muttered in his heart, "You're already crippled. What service are you talking about? You have to have some value." But he still said fervently, "You don't have to be like this. Our Xian Rong faction doesn't differentiate between high and low. We only have different jobs. We are all stones of the faction's great cause. We will move wherever we are needed. No matter where we are, we must shine for the faction's great cause. Little Bai, the faction leader has seen everything you have done. He will not let you have any worries. Moreover, although your position will be different in the future, I still hope that you can make extraordinary contributions in your ordinary position and prove that you are the outstanding backbone of our Xian Rong faction. Hearing Li's words from the bottom of his heart, Bai Yonggui's heart was about to break. He hadn't even returned to the faction, hadn't even been treated by the faction's doctor, and his fate was already decided. Sigh, if I had known this would happen, I wouldn't have done it in the first place. Bai Yonggui thought. Looking at Hall Master Li's eyes and his attempt to comfort Bai Yonggui, how could Bai Yonggui not know what he was thinking? Bai Yonggui helplessly took out the iron box from his bosom and presented it to Hall Master Li. He forced a smile and said, "Hall Master Li, this is something that Junior Marshal Brother Chai and I found overseas. Please accept it on our behalf. Please be careful on the way. When we arrive at the sect and hand it over to the faction leader, I hope Hall Master can put in a good word for us." Li narrowed his eyes and looked at it. He wasn't in a hurry to accept it. He said, "Little Bai, this is your and Chai Feng's work. It's better for you to take it with you. Those who know will know that you are injured and can't protect it. Those who don't know will say that I stole your credit." He enunciated the word injured very clearly. Bai Yonggui said helplessly, "Hall Master Li is wise. This matter is of great importance. Now that I'm injured, I can't protect it well. If anything happens, I'll be the sinner of Xian Rong faction. I hope that Hall Master can understand my difficulties and keep it for me." When Li heard this, he smiled and said, "If that's the case, then I will reluctantly do it. If the credit is yours, then it is yours. Others can't take it even if they want to. Don't you think so, little Bai?" Bai Yonggui smiled and said, Li is right." Li carefully took the iron box and opened it under the cover of dusk. After confirming that there was no problem, he carefully put it away. He looked at the dozen or so disciples around him and waved his hand. "Everyone, you are all meritorious members of the Xian Rong faction. When you return to the faction, you will be greatly rewarded. Let's go, we will return to the faction and receive the reward for your Qinggong." "Okay." When the others heard this, they were all happy. The fear from being beaten up just now disappeared. They followed Li in a certain direction under the cover of dusk. Killing one person in 10 steps, unstoppable for 1,000 miles. Awesome! At this moment, Zhang Xiaohua only wanted to scream. He really liked the feeling of being in control of his own fate. He used his Qinggong to leave the pier, but his divine sense did not leave. He understood the reactions of the people around him. When he was far away, he retracted his divine sense. His body flashed and disappeared. He actually burrowed into the ground and moved stealthily. Then, he jumped out from somewhere and randomly found a direction. He used his Qinggong to run in all directions. After that, he used his Qinggong to move stealthily for a long time. He did this a few times until it was late at night. He then came out and looked around. There was a small village in front of him. Zhang Xiaohua was overjoyed. He moved stealthily and found a huge pile of wheat in a wheat field. He hollowed out the middle of the pile of wheat and entered it. He closed his eyes and began to cultivate. After coming out from the pleasure of being in control of the situation, Zhang Xiaohua had a trace of vigilance in his heart. He was just in the initial stage of qi refining. There was still a long way to go before Venerable Fiery Dragon, who was in the foundation establishment stage. With Venerable Fiery Dragon's strength, he could not help but turn into dust. How could he let go of any opportunity to cultivate? Moreover, the people he had just fought were just some small fries. Zhang Xiaohua was not arrogant enough to compete with Openg and Monk Changgung. Who were those people? They were old monsters who had been immersed in martial arts for decades. They were the leaders of martial arts. Although he was cultivating the way of immortality and had a higher starting point than them, he had not been cultivating for long. It was impossible for him to compete with them now. Therefore, he had to work hard to cultivate. The next day, Zhang Xiaohua scurried out of a pile of wheat straw and struggled to get some information from a farmer's auntie. It wasn't that he didn't look friendly, and the auntie didn't dare to say it. It wasn't that he was dressed in a retro style that scared the auntie. The key was that this auntie was just like Zhang Xiaohua in the past. She had only been to the nearest town, Songning Town, and didn't know anything else. Zhang Xiaohua wanted to ask other people for advice. However, educated people always woke up late and were probably still sleeping. He could not drag them out of their warm beds. Fortunately, this auntie was still clear about the direction of Songning Town and pointed it to Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua thanked her and turned around the haystack. He disappeared with a turn of his body. The enthusiastic auntie who followed behind him shouted, "Young man, that's the way to the pigsty." How could Zhang Xiaohua, who was using Earth Escape, hear her? He only wanted to rush to Songning Town and find the way home. However, after walking for a while, when he felt that it was about time, he released his divine sense but did not see many people. He found a secluded place to jump out and ask someone. Only then did he know that he had gone the wrong way. Alas, he was a directionally challenged idiot, regardless of whether he was above ground or underground. Zhang Xiaohua was helpless. He thanked the person again and continued on his way. Yes, it was the bottom path. This time, although Zhang Xiaohua was very careful to identify the direction, it was all gray underground. How could he see clearly? Before long, Zhang Xiaohua was already annoyed and impatient. He still found a secluded place to come out. Zhang Xiaohua was vexed when he asked someone about it. Earth Escape was fast, but he couldn't grasp the direction. Wasn't this bullshit? The faster he escaped, the more he would deviate. This wasn't a long-term solution. However, looking around, he was in the wilderness. Even the passers-by he had just met were looking at his crutches in panic. Oh, no, his long sword. They thought that he was going to rob them. Where would he find a horse or a carriage? Alas, it was better to use lightness skill. Although he would still be seen, there were people in Jianghu after all. He might not get into trouble. After thinking about it, Zhang Xiaohua used the levitation technique according to the direction pointed by the passers-by and flew straight over. He opened a path when he met a mountain and built a bridge when he met a river. In just the time it took to eat a meal, an extremely lively town appeared in front of him. This was a town about the same size as Lu Town. Zhang Xiaohua was on the main road into the town. Just like any other ordinary town, there were some tea sheds a few miles away from the town entrance for pedestrians and merchants to rest. Zhang Xiaohua picked a slightly larger one and walked in. There was a waiter in this tea shed. He looked at Zhang Xiaohua's appearance with surprise. It was not until the tea shop owner slapped him on the head that he understood. He hurriedly greeted, "Young master, please take a seat. What kind of tea would you like?" Zhang Xiaohua did not want to drink any tea, but looking at the waiter's respectful manner, he felt embarrassed. He could only find a place to sit and said, "Anything will do. I have something to ask." The waiter was somewhat embarrassed. This small shop only has Longjing tea before the rain. I don't know if young master is used to it. Zhang Xiaohua was surprised and said, "I am not a young master. You can just get me some water." The waiter looked at his robe and said with a smile, "Yes, young master is not a young master. I will serve you Longjing tea right away." With that, he left with a smile. At this moment, the people in the tea shed who saw Zhang Xiaohua walking in also came back to their senses. They each said their own things to quench their thirst. A quiet conversation entered Zhang Xiaohua's ears. "I don't know which family this young man is from, but he's also wearing vintage clothes to show off. I don't know what's wrong with him these past few years, but he likes to wear vintage clothes. I really don't know what's so good about this robe. Old Tang, that's because you can't stand it. I've seen many learned people in whose city wearing clothes like this. At first, it's really awkward, but after looking at it for a long time, I actually feel that it's very impressive. Don't you see this young master? He's obviously a playboy, but when he wears this set of clothes, he actually looks cultured and refined, like a learned scholar. It's just that he looks too ordinary." His eyes are a little small, his nose is a little flat, and his ears are small too. He doesn't have good fortune. Otherwise, he could be considered a romantic and elegant person. Pfft, Zhang Xiaohua almost laughed out loud. He looked at his robe, not knowing whether to laugh or cry, and was speechless. Chapter 316. She could not blame herself. The robe belonged to a mortal fire dragon. He was a person from 10,000 years ago. How could his dressing not be retro? Moreover, the long robe was very tight on the body, and not even a speck of dust could touch it. It was obviously a treasure, so how could Zhang Xiaohua be willing to change it? But thinking about other people's eyes, Zhang Xiaohua still had the intention to retreat. Public opinion was powerful. She could not be too unconventional. While she was thinking, the waiter had already made the tea and waited at the side. Zhang Xiaohua was puzzled at first. When she was about to pick up the teacup to taste it, she suddenly thought that the waiter was asking her for a tip. It's all because of this robe. Why not just a cup of water? Why do you want Longjing tea? Alas, for this robe, I even have to spend money. This money grubber did not even think about the countless luminous pearl in his money bag. Even the treasures he got from the secret chamber in Shitsui Mountain were not much. Now he actually cared about being tipped by others. Zhang Xiaohua groped in her clothes for a long time. She frowned. The money bag was full of shocking things. She could not take out anything. What was in the money bag were the pieces of silver and a few banknotes that Zhang Xiaohu gave her when she came out of the Guizhuang house a few years ago. Where would she get the copper coins? After thinking for a while, she said to the waiter who had been longing for a long time, "Waiter, how much is this tea?" "Silver?" "Young master, you must be joking. It's only 14 copper coins." Zhang Xiaohua was helpless. She took out the smallest piece of silver from the money bag. It was about 2 copper coins. She threw it to the waiter and said, "Waiter, it's not that I don't want to give you a tip. It's just that I don't have any copper coins. This silver is the money for the tea and the tip. I'll give you a total of 20 copper coins. Give me the change later." When the waiter heard this, the smile on his face disappeared. He thought that this young master was generous and did not need the change. Who knew? The waiter impatiently took the money and handed it back. He said, "Dear customer, our tea house is a small business. How can we have so much loose change for you? Why don't you give me some copper coins?" Zhang Xiaohua laughed and said, If I had some copper coins, I would have given them to you long ago. Why would I give you silver?" The shop assistant looked at him and said sarcastically, "Young master, the smallest piece of silver you have is 2 taels. You don't know that it's almost enough to buy our tea shed. You're really generous." Hearing the word generous, Zhang Xiaohua suddenly understood that this snobbish shop assistant wanted her to give him all the money without asking for change. How was this possible? Not to mention that his parents, elder brother, and elder sister-in-law were working in the fields all day long, and they might not even be able to earn 1 silver coin a day. He was working as a manservant in Huanxi Manor, and his monthly salary was only 3 silver coins. How could he casually spend these 2 silver coins? After all, he was a real country boy, not some hedonistic son of a rich family. Zhang Xiaohua looked at the shop assistant and took back the silver with a smile. He said, "It's okay. I haven't drunk a sip of this tea. You can take it back. Just consider that I didn't come in today." After that, he stood up and was about to leave. The shop assistant could not take it anymore. He hurriedly grabbed his hand and said, You. Today you bully people. Do you want to rely on your money to bully us poor people? You. Zhang Xiaohua heard that this guy actually said so and could not help but be annoyed. At this time, a manservant who was boiling water for the kettle hurried over and saluted, "Big brother Yao, this young master, don't worry. This young master, if you believe me, give this silver to me." I'll go to the front and help you change it into copper coins. What do you think? Zhang Xiaohua was stunned. He looked at the manservant with a long nose and shabby clothes. However, his eyes were abnormally clear. He was not afraid to face Zhang Xiaohua's question. Pei, Xiaohua Ji, you manservant Xiaohua, hurry up and burn your fire. Be careful that I don't report you to the shopkeeper. Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua's eyes flashed with interest. He asked, your name is Xiaohua Ji, Little Flower? The manservant was a little shy and said, yes, this young master is Little Flower. Why isn't your surname Zhang? Zhang Xiaohua asked with interest. Xiaohua Ji saw that this young master was very amiable and also very respectfully replied, my father's surname is Ji and my mother's surname is Zhang. Naturally, I followed my father's surname. How can I follow my mother's surname? Zhang Xiaohua laughed and said, Xiaohua, how old are you? 9 years old, young master. Humph, your father died when you were 7 years old. Your life is really tough. Even your mother is sick because of you. The shop assistant said somewhat fiercely, in a few days, you will change your surname to Zhang Xiaohua. Hee, what a funny name. From Ji Xiaohua to Zhang Xiaohua, how unpleasant to hear. Shua, Zhang Xiaohua grabbed the teacup on the table and splashed it on the shop assistant's face. His face was ashen and said, shut up, did I let you speak? When Zhang Xiaohua was angry, there was a faint imposing manner. The shop assistant was so scared that he almost forgot to wipe the tea on his face. Fortunately, the tea had been dried for a while and was no longer boiling hot. Otherwise, at this time, the shopkeeper of the tea house heard the noise from outside and hurriedly came in. He didn't ask about the situation and immediately apologized. Zhang Xiaohua ignored him. He smiled and handed the silver to Xiaohua Ji and said, okay, this silver is for you. Help me exchange it. The shopkeeper hurriedly persuaded, this young master, no need. This tea is on me. You don't have to pay. How could Zhang Xiaohua take advantage of him like this? He smiled and said, it's not easy for you to do business here. Naturally, you should take money. However, my silver didn't grow on trees. I can't give it to you for free. After he finished speaking, he waved his hand at Xiaohua Ji and let him go. At this time, a man at the table next to them stood up and said, this young master, perhaps you rarely go out. Zhang Xiaohua saw and smiled, yes, I've always been studying at home. I rarely go out. The man walked over and said, there's a saying in the pugilistic world. Rely on your parents at home and rely on your friends when you go out. Since we can meet in such a remote place, it can be considered fate. Little brother, I'll pay for the tea for you. Come over and have a chat. Zhang Xiaohua looked at the man and didn't want to pay much attention to him. However, she thought that she still needed to find out the location of Pingyang City and Lu Town. Perhaps she could get some information from this man. Hence, she smiled and said, sure, I admire people like you who roam the pugilistic world. I'd like to learn a thing or two from you. After she finished speaking, she invited the man to take a seat. The shopkeeper and the shop assistant saw that they had nothing to do and left. However, since no one was around to light the fire, the shop assistant had to do it himself. The man and Zhang Xiaohua sat down together and chatted casually. From time to time, he bragged about his experiences in the pugilistic world. He didn't forget to show off his muscles and martial arts skills. Then, he discreetly tried to find out more about Zhang Xiaohua. At this moment, how could Zhang Xiaohua not understand anything? She only smiled perfunctorily and started to talk nonsense while waiting for Xiaohua Ji to return. After chatting for a while, the man saw the long sword by Zhang Xiaohua's feet. He smiled and said, Brother Wu, do you like swordsmanship? If there's time, I can indeed introduce you to a famous pugilistic expert. When the time comes, he can also give you a good sword. How can you bring out such a crude sword? As he said that, he kicked it with his feet. Zhang Xiaohua stepped on the long sword without a trace and said, I just casually picked it up. "Oh right, Brother Sue, I have something to ask you." Just as she was about to speak, the scabby-headed Ji Xiaohua Ji came back from outside, panting. His hands were tightly wrapped around his chest. He ran all the way to Zhang Xiaohua's side and then heaved a sigh of relief. He took out an even smaller piece of silver and a large pile of copper coins from his chest and said breathlessly, "Young master, please wait. This is 1 tael of silver and 100 copper coins." Zhang Xiaohua asked, "Why did it take so long? Didn't you say it was just beside? I thought you took my money and ran away." Ji Xiaohua Ji's face turned red and said anxiously, "How could I? The shops beside all have copper coins. I was afraid that it would be difficult for young master to take them, so I went to a few shops and finally found 1 tael of silver." "Oh, young master, please count it." Zhang Xiaohua smiled. He had already used his divine senses to scan the whole pile of copper coins. Not a single one was missing. He said, "No need, I believe you." Ji Xiaohua Ji's face turned even redder. He smiled embarrassedly and continued to walk to the fire to boil water. Zhang Xiaohua kept all the copper coins on the table and did not take out a single copper coin. He then asked the man, "I want to ask Brother Su something. Do you know Pingyang City?" "Pingyang City?" The man was stunned and immediately said, I know. A few years ago, when I was running darts, I always went to Pingyang City. I'm very familiar with it." "I see. I heard that there's a scenery called Calm Lake and Autumn Moon in Pingyang City. I've admired it for a long time and really want to take a look. But I don't know how to get there." "Oh, I see. The scenery you mentioned is in the south of Pingyang City. It's really not bad. My martial brothers in Pingyang City often invited me there to admire it. As for how to get to Pingyang City, you see, from this road to the west, pass through Songning Town, walk for another day, then head north. Walk for another 17 or 18 days and you should reach there." "Hee, I know. Thank you very much, Brother Su. I still have some matters to attend to, so I won't take up any more of your precious time." With that, he cupped his hands and picked up the long sword at his feet. He shouted to the shopkeeper, "Shopkeeper, this Master Su has paid for my bill." Then, he walked out in big strides. He left the man who was sitting at the old table behind him. He raised his hand and opened his mouth. He wanted to say something but could not. He wanted to wave but could not. He looked awkward. The shopkeeper walked forward and smiled. "Thank you, Master Su. It's a total of 20 copper coins." The man shouted, "What nonsense is this Long Jing? It's no different from drinking plain water. Do you think I'm that white sheep? Here, it's 10 copper coins. Take it or leave it." With that, he threw out a large sum of money from his pocket. Just as the shopkeeper was collecting the money, the mangy-headed page boy who was boiling water also rubbed his hands and gritted his teeth. He seemed to have made a decision. When he saw that the shopkeeper was not paying attention, he ran out in a flash.